Chapter 301. The Grace of the Kind Father and the Past of Rage Owl Star. Hearing the report, Wajia opened his eyes. His slanting eyes seemed very indifferent. He said, "All buried underground. Why has it come to this?" The person opposite didn't speak, only beads of sweat began to form on his forehead. Wajia continued, "It's been quite some time since my teacher defected and left. It's also been a while since we decided to abandon it, so why, even today, has everything not been moved away?" "Sorry, Chairman." The researcher's body was already trembling. "The benevolent Father never uses punishment to teach the world," Wajia said. "The benevolent Father always takes upon himself the sins of all things. When we do not perform well enough, the benevolent Father bestows more blessings to help his followers grow, in the hope that they may succeed next time." Upon hearing this, the researcher trembled even more intensely. But in the end, he didn't dare to say any more and instead bowed deeply, "I will heed your teachings." Wajia waved his hand, signaling the other to leave. Just a few dozen seconds later, low, pained, yet mixed with a sense of pleasure, inhuman howls came from outside. Wajia closed his eyes once more amidst the growling sounds, entering a trance-like state. His consciousness arrived in a thick void. Voices of grandeur, benevolence, or cruelty whispered continuously in his ears. And now, he didn't carefully distinguish what those whispers from heaven were about like he had done at first, he only felt in entirety, eagerly absorbing all the information contained within. He only worried that his own wisdom and spiritual perception weren't enough, unable to fully comprehend every piece of teaching from heaven, understanding just a tiny bit. While he was experiencing the gospel from heaven, a noisy voice rose from deep within his heart. "Don't believe, don't listen, be cautious, they are deceiving you, they are the demons." Wajia furrowed his brows, harshly suppressing those words rising from the depths of his heart. The whispers from heaven became clearer and more profound at that moment. One voice directed him to dedicate that thing which always contradicted, to the benevolent Father. It was a very tempting offer. Every time that voice rang out, many painful memories from the past would surge forth. At this moment, that's what was happening. In those memories, it seemed he was a war hero. He was one of the Rage Owl Star people, having the good fortune to follow a prophet named Huke, working and learning by his side. And then, the war broke out. First, it was said that there were major accidents in the exploitation of the spiritualized gas fields on the other two continents, followed by a massive low-energy storm that swept over those continents. It even crossed oceans, bringing tsunamis along with it to assault the main continent. It was a scene like the sky and the earth were breaking apart. However, after the natural disasters, on the Rage Owl Star's two subsidiary continents, several enormous abyssal rifts appeared. Hordes of demons emerged, crossing the ocean in fleets, igniting two main fronts, setting the main continent's battlefield ablaze. Wajia remembered, at that time he abandoned his studies to join the army, using what he had learned from his teacher to fight for the survival of humanity. Their efforts were effective. The Planetary Defense Force was far from a match for the demons that crossed the veil of reality, but with noble sacrifices, they fought without yielding an inch in incredibly disadvantageous battles. Under layers of interception, the demons always maintained a great advantage in battle, but their advance was anything but easy. Eventually, they held off the demons' onslaught, and received reinforcements from the Star Realm's empire. But the arrival of Starfleet, Star Realm Army, didn't save this world. Wajia, as a person who had personally experienced that prolonged war, thought just that. Originally, he was overjoyed at the arrival of the Empire's reinforcements and boldly accepted the Star Realm Army commander's reorganization of the Planetary Defense Force to continue fighting those creatures. But what did he witness? To strike against the demons, to prevent more people from falling, orbital bombardments were conducted without hesitation. One after another, cities that hadn't completed evacuation or hadn't even begun to evacuate were destroyed by their own. To stop more abyssal rifts, more psychic energy fields were destroyed, bringing about even greater climatic disasters. These actions are hard to say were wrong. But looking at it from an objective point of view, did the Empire's army save Rage Owl Star? No, it did not. Throughout the decades of a drawn-out war, both sides used extreme measures, various weapons of the Extinction Order were unleashed, then counteracted by both parties. During this process, countless people were sacrificed, and Rage Owl Star, once beautiful and fertile, became incredibly desolate. In the end, humanity achieved victory. All the demons on the planet were eradicated. But was this a victory for the Rage Owl Star people? 99.5% of the Rage Owl Star people died in the war. Was this the victory they wished for? Chapter 302. After the victory of the war, Wajia, who had aged significantly, fell into deep befuddlement. It was also since this time that he gradually began to hear some strange whispers in his ears. He was very cautious about this. Having fought against demons for many years, he was acutely aware that such inexplicable whispers appearing by one's ear were very dangerous things. Even though the voices he heard were so gentle, so kind, he still dared not take them lightly. Fortunately, after having battled for so long, his own level had reached that of an engine prophet, with sufficient technical ability to solve problems. He did not report the matter. Members of the tribunal accompanying the army would have been extremely nervous about it. He did not want to trouble others, nor did he wish, after the victory of the war, to have to visit the dark cells of the tribunal. He had more important things to do. He simply made a device and implanted it into his brain to block the mysterious whispers. After the war was won, the Star Realm army left. A colonel brigade commander felt that he was capable and invited him to leave together. But he refused. He said he wanted to stay and rebuild his homeland. He spent several years wandering the entire planet, establishing the Nature Salvation Society. With his proficiency in technology, he slowly and diligently restored the ecology of this world and healed the sick. During that time, he helped many people. Rebuilding the entire world might have seemed far-fetched and was not something he could achieve alone, as he approached the limit of his lifespan. He just hoped that his actions could make the world a little bit better. Even a little bit would be enough. When the rebuilding teams finally arrived, the foundations of Rage Owl Star might be a bit better, which could save a bit of effort for the new imperial governor in rebuilding the world. And then he waited and waited, but the expected rebuilding fleet never came. During that period, occasionally a few spacecraft would come from beyond the skies, carrying Rage Owl Star people who had once left this place, to take some of their old friends away. This was also the only method of communication with the outside world for Rage Owl Star at that time. It was for this reason that he heard the news that the Empire had abandoned Rage Owl Star, designating it as a wasteland planet with no value for reconstruction. The Empire would not spend a great deal of effort to recolonize it. What did Wajia feel when he first heard this news? He was somewhat unclear. He only remembered that a long-standing doubt that had always revolved around him seemed to unravel. Did the Empire come to save Rage Owl Star? It did not. Before the war, the Empire was only interested in the resources on Rage Owl Star, constantly demanding from it, regardless of the risks that extracting the psychic energy fields posed to the entire world. They merely wanted energy. During the war, they merely used the entire planet as a chessboard, as a battlefield, as part of the endless war that had been going on in the vast star sea between the power known as the Empire and the power known as the Abyss, a war that persisted for tens of thousands of years. Within this, the fate of Rage Owl Star and its people were insignificant. Even the victory or defeat of this war was not all that important. It was just one of many wars taking place at any given moment in the Empire's boundless territories. What difference does a single victory or defeat make to the overall situation? After the war, they coldly calculated the cost of reconstruction versus the benefits of recolonization. When the cost exceeded the benefits, they naturally chose to give up. As for the remaining 0.5% of the population on Rage Owl Star, they would find their own way to live in their world. In summary, there was no talk of rescue or not rescuing. The Empire did not care about Rage Owl Star, nor did it care about the people on it. In that indifference, he impulsively removed the blocker he had created and implanted in his brain. At that moment, the gospel of heaven, countless times greater than the faint whispers he had heard before, flooded into his mind, flooded into his soul. He prayed to heaven, hoping to save this world. If the Empire won't save it, I'll save it myself. The Heavenly Father, as he wished, bestowed his grace. From that time on, he was completely transformed. The Father has treated this world with gentleness, I shall become the agent of the Father, spreading his gentleness throughout the world. Only in this way can Rage Owl Star receive the salvation it deserves. The roaring outside had stopped, leaving only heavy panting. And Wajia had finished his meditation. He was not too happy, as a dissenting voice emerging from the depths of his heart had disturbed his listening to the gospel of heaven. He whispered, "Next time you make a sound, I'll sacrifice you." There was no response. That was as it should be. He didn't mind. The celestial kingdom was about to descend, and he would keep that faint notion in his heart, to witness with his own eyes the wondrous place Rage Owl Star would become after the descent of the Celestial Kingdom. It would be more wonderful than before the onset of war. He firmly believed in the promise the loving Father had made to him. His attention returned to Chanter Town. In fact, he didn't need anyone to report to him. His consciousness extended outward, and those plants that had received the grace of the Celestial Kingdom had all become his eyes. However, he saw something that made him even unhappier. The Alliance dogs, the very ones that the researcher had reported would be buried underground, were now charging out. Behind them were many of the Celestial Kingdom's genetic servants in pursuit, but they were dying in large numbers under the concentrated firepower. Even the defense layers constructed by spiritual energy could not completely withstand the damage from laser guns. He also saw that among those Alliance dogs, the leader had installed a thermobaric bomb and detonated it as the Celestial Kingdom's servants attacked, causing massive casualties. The remaining individuals were struggling to move some materials they had snatched to the Wind Falcon rapid attack vessel that was stationary on the ground. 2 more Wind Falcons also reappeared in the sky, launching a missile each. The missiles drilled into the Research Institute's entrance and exploded inside, eliminating even more of the Celestial Kingdom's servants. Wajia could no longer bear the sight of this continuing. He stepped out of his hiding place, looking out. Chanter Town was not far from his sight. The researcher who had just received the blessing was panting heavily on the ground. And beside him, there were dozens of Celestial Kingdom servants resembling the lizardmen from underneath the Research Institute. Wajia said, "You will receive more blessings, now is the time for you to show loyalty to the loving Father." The researcher stood up, his stature had grown much larger than before, his body beginning to show pustules, and even maggots were crawling in and out of these pustules. That man simply nodded slightly and led his team towards Chanter Town. Wajia followed closely behind, his slender, indifferent eyes fixed on the 2 circling Wind Falcons. "Our weapon systems have malfunctioned. Damn! Why is this happening? The servo skull has lost connection with the main system. No. This is bad. The fire control is targeting friendly forces." The 2 Wind Falcons in the sky were in total chaos at this moment. Lieutenant Cookie, upon hearing the frantic voices of his comrades over the communicator, seemed a bit frustrated, shut down the servo skull's control over the Wind Falcon's fire control system, switched to manual operation. "But that's an order. Execute it immediately. If a single bullet falls on our own forces, you'll be explaining it to the discipline committee when we return." The pilot of another Wind Falcon finally carried out his orders. But this triggered quite severe consequences. The Alliance's pilots hadn't spent enough time flying, their training was also insufficient, and they were rushed onto the battlefield. Relying on the assistance of the servo skull, they were barely competent in performing tasks that didn't require too much difficult maneuvering. But now, having severed the connection with the servo skull and switching to full manual operation, they immediately showed their lack of skill. But at least, there was no longer the danger of striking friendly forces. Lieutenant Cookie also shut down the servo skull's assistance, but he performed much better than his comrades. Without the servo skull, although his control over the aircraft was still affected, at least he wouldn't be like the guy next to him, barely maintaining altitude. "Let me show you what an ace pilot can do," Cookie roared, turning the nose of the aircraft, targeting the dozens of lizardmen mutants rushing out from the edge of Chanter Town. Die! He pulled the trigger. Chapter 303. Cookie's strike was effective. The enemies seemed not to have expected that one of the Wind Falcons, which had just been flailing around in the sky headlessly, could turn around so quickly and launch an attack. The machine gun and laser cannon fired simultaneously, and within a few seconds, the street where the band of monsters had been charging was plowed through. The effect was still very good. Those monsters still possessed some sort of spiritual energy trait, allowing them to activate a self-protection around themselves when under attack. However, how could such protection withstand the Wind Falcon, when it could be breached with a single overcharged shot from a laser rifle, or several intensive shots in a short time? A 40mm caliber could already be considered a cannon, let alone the laser cannon. Either of these weapons, if they hit their target, would cause a devastating blow to the creature's body. The 3-meter-tall lizard monster was no exception. The self-protective spiritual energy would be penetrated, the 40mm kinetic cannon could directly obliterate half of its body, the laser cannon would simply dissolve its torso. After a rapid burst, a third of the monsters charging had fallen to the ground, becoming piles of mangled flesh. Cookie was not yet satisfied and wanted to fire another round. Although those still alive were no longer foolish enough to continue sprinting down the wide open and unsheltered street, instead they took cover behind the whitewashed houses on either side, moving forward step by step. But those brick-wood structures, pretty as they were, could not withstand the machine gun fire or the laser beams. Even though the results wouldn't be as exaggerated as before, a little was still something. What's more, he was covering his ground comrades in this manner. Lacroix and others, carrying a large amount of data and materials, were moving to the other Wind Falcon that was still on the ground. The situation was urgent. Even though many seemingly less valuable and hard-to-transport items had already been abandoned, the remaining stuff was still not insignificant, and they would probably need a few more minutes. Without intervention, those monsters could reach them in a minute or two. Under the suppression of firepower, not to mention the casualties, at least those monsters wouldn't be able to reach the battlefield quickly. He was using this method to buy time for the special forces below. However, things were not going to be that easy. Suddenly, he felt that the Wind Falcon he was piloting had gone out of control. The nose of the craft started to turn involuntarily, making flight extremely difficult. Every maneuver he made was either amplified or minimized, and the Wind Falcon became very unstable. At such a moment, he still had the leisure to complain to himself, "Good thing I didn't have automatic fire on, or else I'd have to send myself to the discipline committee." In such a situation, any member of the Allied Air Force would have been unable to escape a crash. Without their servo skulls, those pilots about to enter the fray were barely able to perform, let alone now when the entire aircraft's controls were experiencing problems. But wasn't he claimed to be some ace pilot? Even in these circumstances, although he couldn't continue providing fire support to his comrades on the ground to help them suppress those charging monsters, he hadn't succumbed to a crash. The Wind Falcon was spinning in the sky, but not falling down was good enough. Moreover, the special forces led by Lacroix weren't pushovers either. Taking advantage of the little time Lieutenant Cook had bought for them, Lacroix had led a team to form a makeshift blocking position to buy time for their comrades behind. Their shooting skills were exceptionally strong, and they had already been tipped off about the special aspects of those lizard monsters. They would use concentrated fire and, when necessary, overcharge their LR-5 laser rifles at critical moments, even if it meant using up a high-energy battery in one go. One after another, the monsters were annihilated during their charge. Lacroix was the one with the most kills. The power crystal he had equipped in his exoskeleton armor was too luxurious to be used on individual equipment but provided him with outstanding combat capabilities. Each shot was an overcharged blast, with a high frequency, and key to this was his ability to nearly always hit the target. His fire alone was as effective as all the others combined. Given enough time and the right distance, Lacroix alone might have had a chance to shoot down all those lizard monsters during their charge. Unfortunately, there was no time. Even though the monsters had already been hit by an aerial cannon barrage, there were still upwards of 50 of them. The distance between them wasn't that great to begin with, and under the command of a huge one wearing a vague white lab coat that seemed to be the leader, they charged ferociously and fearlessly, consistently closing the gap to the blocking position. And the good news was that the Wind Falcon behind them had finally finished loading the cargo. Everything else was left behind. Lacroix called out, instructing his comrades to fight while retreating. As for himself, he stood at the very end of the group, providing stable and precise strikes, time after time. Moreover, he targeted that particularly distinctive enemy. Chapter 304. The intelligence level of that guy is not on the same scale as the other monsters. Although he was also charging with the main force, he always kept his body behind at least one lizardman, never carelessly exposing himself to the firing line. But, was this foolproof? Lacroix had been watching him for a long time. And now, there was an opportunity. When he saw that the Special Forces soldiers had a chance to retreat, the creature seemed to grow anxious. It let out a long howl to the sky, calling on its subordinate lizardmen to launch an even more fierce assault. They were now within arm's reach, and every human must be stopped from boarding the aircraft. The lizardmen, indeed, accelerated their advance as commanded. However, in that instant, a very slight gap appeared between Lacroix and him. And this gap was tightly seized by the Alliance Soldier King. He pulled the trigger, and the overloaded, dark red laser beam shot past the ears of many lizardmen, hitting its mark on the guy's head through that slight gap. He, too, possessed some sort of spiritual energy protection, which was much stronger than that of ordinary lizardmen. Even when hit by the laser, a yellow-green energy shield visibly appeared. Even an overloaded shot couldn't immediately break through the spiritual energy protection. But this was already within Lacroix's expectations. What followed was a second shot, then a third. After that, there were no more windows to shoot through. But it didn't matter, those 3 shots were enough. The second shot broke the yellow-green shield, and with the third shot, the creature's head was pierced through. The remaining lizardmen, suddenly leaderless, fell into chaos. Taking this opportunity, the last soldier, besides Lacroix, had already boarded the Wind Falcon. Even then, the Wind Falcon had begun to take off, already almost a meter from the ground. It was at that moment that Lacroix finally stopped shooting. He first tossed his overheated rifle, probably unusable without major repairs after this, onto the aircraft, then took a high jump, grabbing onto the edge of the open hatch. With the help of a comrade's hand, he heaved himself onto the plane. Immediately afterward, he turned around, took the rifle handed to him by a comrade, connected it to his own energy crystal power supply, and leaned against the edge of the Wind Falcon's cabin, starting to shoot downward. He hadn't forgotten that these lizard creatures had a special ability. As they neared their target, the spiritual energy talent they possessed could cause a delay in the target's movements. He wasn't sure about the range at which this ability could be triggered, nor could he guarantee that when multiple lizardmen were present, their spiritual energy talents wouldn't resonate with each other, leading to a more pronounced effect. For others, it might be fine, but if the pilot of the Wind Falcon they were boarding were to be delayed, with the servo skull forced offline, they might truly be unable to fly. After all, not everyone was on the level of Lieutenant Cookie. With this in mind, shooting downward to reduce the numbers of lizard creatures was certainly a worthwhile endeavor. Killing a few extra enemies was never a loss. All things considered, things had been relatively smooth up to now. The anti-gravity engine of the Wind Falcon roared as the aircraft began to accelerate for a vertical ascent. In a few more seconds, once they picked up speed, they could soar hundreds of meters above the ground in the blink of an eye. At that height, they were almost out of danger. Once the thrusters kicked in, they could reach, or even break, the sound barrier in an instant, flying off into the distance, leaving the enemy troops on the ground, no matter their number or capability, as no threat at all. But just then, the fast attack craft they were on suddenly swayed violently. The Wind Falcon was losing control. What's going on? Why won't the machine respond? The pilot's cries of alarm kept coming. Clearly, he had encountered a situation like Cookie's before. A mysterious force was throwing off the precision of mechanical controls. Each operation was exaggerated or diminished. Even Cookie, relying on manual control in such a situation, could barely keep the Wind Falcon from falling, not to mention the one Lacroix and the others were on now. Lacroix's powerful arms gripped the side of the hatch, forcibly steadying his body. At this moment, he felt incredibly calm. Now, they were nearly 100 meters above the ground. Falling from this height, relying on his exoskeleton, relying on his body's strength that had mysteriously become many times stronger recently, perhaps he himself could survive. But the others on the plane would probably suffer heavy losses. What's worse, all the precious materials loaded onto the craft would no longer have a chance to be taken away again. They had to solve the problem. In the blink of an eye, he noticed a tiny figure slowly rising in the distance, nearly 2,000 meters away. To the average person, a target at this distance was just a dot. However, with his eyesight and the display inside his full coverage tactical helmet, he could still make out that it seemed to be a bald man wearing a dark green robe. The air around him was constantly distorting. Some magical power was emanating from his body. Lacroix judged that this was very likely the culprit affecting both Wind Falcons. In the split second, he raised his LR-5 laser rifle to overload mode, a red beam streaked across the sky. That shot hit dead center. Giwagia lowered his head, looking at the penetrating wound that had appeared in his chest, astonishment showing on his indifferent face. He could interfere with 2 Wind Falcons from a distance of 2 kilometers, thanks to the power of spiritual energy, a grace from the benevolent Father. He, of course, also possessed the ability to protect himself with spiritual energy, which, if fully activated, wouldn't be so easily penetrated, even by an overloaded laser rifle. However, he had not actively activated his spiritual energy defense earlier. He was an old warrior, yet he hadn't personally experienced the battlefield and the threat of life and death for many years. He never imagined that after throwing that adept pilot's Wind Falcon into turmoil, anything could still harm him. But that soldier managed it. A laser rifle in overload mode could maintain tremendous lethality over a distance of 2 kilometers, which was not surprising, but how could he hit the target? A distance of 2,000 meters was something only a super sniper could achieve, wasn't it? It needed a fine weapon, a steady mind, ample time for calculation, aiming. And yet that Alliance soldier, in the heat of the moment, on a wildly swaying plane, one hand on the hatch and the other aimed at Giwajia, took a shot from 2 kilometers away. And he hit the target. A stream of fresh blood coughed out from the corner of his mouth. He was floating about 10 meters above the ground, but now he couldn't maintain his position and began to uncontrollably descend. But it wasn't over yet. After Lacroix's shot, both the Wind Falcons teetering on the edge of control regained stability. The Wind Falcon carrying the spoils and soldiers immediately started to climb, eager to avoid any further mishaps and get away quickly. The other Wind Falcon, piloted by Cookie, didn't just climb, it viciously turned its nose toward Giwajia and fired a dense barrage of bullets. Cookie had also seen Lacroix's shot. Though he found it just as unbelievable, as soon as the plane returned to normal, he immediately understood that Lacroix had hit a critical target, saving everyone. There was little else he could do at this time, but to lay into the beaten dog, to give it another vicious blow, was only right. What if he wasn't dead? If worse came to worst, they'd whip the corpse too. Chapter 305. The first battle after the establishment of the Special Combat Brigade was something Gu Heng still cared about. He read the complete battle report and felt quite emotional. A combat team of 30 people, 6 died, but they completed the mission and possibly eliminated a high-value enemy target. What more was there to fuss over? Especially for Lacroix and Cookie, Gu Heng personally issued commendations. The former goes without saying, he was a hero activated by Gu Heng with favor points, the currently unique character specialized in combat on the system interface. What's restricting his combat power now is his equipment. If given even better gear, like upgrading the LR5 laser rifle to a Hellgun, bomb launcher, plasma, or thermite weapon, he might even be able to match up with a Rage Owl Star Warrior. Still, comparing to Rage Owl Star Warriors, if instead of the Special Combat Brigade, it was Phoenix fighters deployed for this mission, the completion would indeed have been smoother. But now, there are only 4 Rage Owl Star Warriors left, irreplaceable resources. Whereas the soldiers of the Special Combat Brigade, although it sounds a bit harsh to say, they indeed qualify as consumables. Despite the sacrifices, even with a soldier king like Lacroix leading, and the mission's rough completion, as long as they can accomplish similar special operations, that was already very good. How much is a Rage Owl Star Warrior worth, and how much is a Special Forces soldier? Gu Heng did not like to measure the lives of warriors in cold numbers. However, as a leader, as a ruler, sometimes he had no choice but to make such cold calculations. Of course, the compensation for the 6 fallen soldiers would not be short. Those who lived and completed the mission should get enough combat allowances and bonuses, as well as honor. These matters would be handled by Tadeus's military administration department, so Gu Heng didn't need to worry too much about them. His attention returned to the report submitted by researcher Hu Ke. The engine prophet had inspected the spoils brought back by Wind Falcon and submitted a report. He said the materials picked up this time were of great value, and there was a chance to decipher some important information from them. For example, to verify whether the Nature Salvation Society really found a complete, undamaged spiritualized gas field as he had previously guessed, to check what they were actually using the spiritualized gas field for, to attempt to calculate the location of the spiritualized gas field. Hearing this statement, Gu Heng felt a surge of great expectation. Gu Heng greatly cared about the deranged cult and the spiritualized gas field. Dealing with the cult was greatly linked to solving the problems of the Green Valley region. However, it seemed that relying solely on the military would be difficult. Once the Nature Salvation Society concealed themselves in the jungle, what could the military do to them? The Central Group Army claimed to have approximately 60,000 troops, with over 100,000 militia available for deployment, but such numbers tossed into the jungle would not even make a splash. Rather, it depended on precise intelligence, special operations teams for accurate strikes, guiding the orbital fire support from the sky for bombing, or at worst, dispatching the globally deployable Wind Falcon for bombing. Of course, this didn't mean that the current strategy for Green Valley was to be abandoned. As for the jungle, Gu Heng had already made up his mind to eradicate it completely. But he also had no intention of trapping his main forces there for a long time. Total eradication was possible, but it would take too long. He ordered the Central Group Army to completely stabilize the situation in the Biking Valley region, then proceed south along the established roads, helping as many survivors from the South Green Valley region to move north as possible, and set up a defensive line between Biking Valley and South Green Valley. With that, their mission would be considered complete. In the meantime, the militia would receive more effective training and better equipment. Subsequently, the task of maintaining the defense line between Biking and South Green Valley would be handed over to the local militia, and the main forces would withdraw. Indeed, according to Gu Hang's strategy, he was prepared to relinquish control of the South Green Valley land. It wasn't necessary, even if it was conquered, there wasn't enough population to develop it. As long as the remaining few million people in the direction of South Green Valley could be brought back, that was enough. The Biking Valley region, with its estimated 2 to 3 million square kilometers of land, mostly fertile arable land, could not only feed 10 million people, but the grain produced here alone would suffice for the entire population of Rage Owl Star, with surplus for grain exports. Truth be told, the 10 million people might struggle to properly develop Biking Valley. So, let the South Green Valley region remain as is for now, wait until the future, when Rage Owl Star's population grows significantly and there is greater demand for land and food. Gu Hang now realized more profoundly that Rage Owl Star didn't lack land, it lacked population. His pace of unification wasn't for those many worthless lands, it was meaningless, expanding the ruling population was the core matter. If the 10 million people of the Green Valley region could be incorporated into his rule, then he would have achieved his desired Green Valley strategy. Gu Hang gave Yan Fangxia 6 months for this process. As for the Nature Salvation Society, Gu Hang needed to treat it as another separate issue. He hoped that Hu Ke could decipher more information, he hoped for Wind Falcon's normalized patrols and air strikes, he hoped for the Special Combat Brigade's special warfare operations in the south. Chapter 306. Capture the living, probe for clues. Seek, discover, exterminate. Continue this process relentlessly until every last one of those cultists is annihilated. If the clues decoded by Hu Ke are sufficiently detailed, they could help him deliver a fatal blow, wiping out the cultists in one fell swoop. That, of course, would be ideal. If not, Gu Hang was not afraid to turn this into a long-term battle. The only concern was the complete spiritualized gas field that the cultists had discovered. That was an exceedingly advanced energy source, and Gu Hang wasn't sure what they would do with it. However, considering the history of Rage Owl Star, the source of the demonic disaster here was the excessive exploitation of the spiritualized gas field, leading to the thinning of the veil between reality and the abyss. Add some human activity and cult infection factors to the mix, and it ultimately led to a demonic invasion. Now that a complete spiritualized gas field was in the hands of the cultists, who were intent on summoning demons and calling upon evil gods, the situation, when combined, was deeply troubling. However, looking on the bright side, once Wind Falcon's patrols in the south become routine, there were certain scenarios Gu Hang would be able to scout ahead of time. If the worst scenario unfolded and the cultists tore open a new chasm into the abyss, the disturbance would surely not be minor. Early detection would give Gu Hang a chance to handle the situation before it became unmanageable. Of course, it would be best if he could discover it even earlier. For this reason, he was very much looking forward to the results of Hu Ke's work. However, he waited for over a month without any results. To be honest, Gu Hang was anxious. Because an important event would happen this month, the beautiful lady convoy and the quintet would both depart during this time. They needed to repair their ships. Though his cousin had left, Yelazia would remain, and an escort ship named the Blade Tiger had arrived here. The captain of the Blade Tiger, named Duz Heshan, was a lieutenant colonel in the Imperial Navy. His rank was significantly lower than Yelazia's. Though, theoretically, as the captain and commander, the ship was his to command, with Yelazia present, the command would undoubtedly fall into the hands of the female brigadier general without any surprises. It's likely that Duz Heshan had anticipated this, and perhaps had even communicated early on with the Fufana family, deeply embedded within the Tianma Star Sector naval system, fully understanding his mission for the coming year and would likely be cooperative. But no matter what, swapping a main strike cruiser for an escort ship, was like trading a cannon for a bird gun. Gu Hang had hoped that Hu Ke would complete the decoding and reconstruction of the trophy information within this month, locate the spiritualized gas field, and send people to scout the area immediately, so that they would be ready to call in an orbital strike if necessary for a fierce attack. No matter how many schemes those Chaos Cult members had, they couldn't withstand a shot of divine justice from the Wrath of Loyalty macro cannon. But now... Oops, the Wrath of Loyalty was gone. How about a scalpel missile instead? Yelazia had described to Gu Hang the weapon's configuration on the Blade Tiger, which was embarrassingly inferior compared to the quintet, just 30 S-type weapons, and that's it. 10 reflector interception lasers, 10 defender rapid-fire cannons, and 10 scalpel missile launch platforms. That's all. Reflectors can't hit the ground. To attempt it, they would lose a significant amount of energy passing through the atmosphere and would not be able to carry out an orbital strike mission. The defender rapid-fire cannons would barely be suitable, the scalpel missiles would work. But obviously, compared to a full barrage from the quintet, with 200 scalpel missiles, 20 heat hammer macro cannons, and 2 loyal rage macro cannons, there was simply no contest. It was just better than nothing. If only the Allied Air Force could expand further, having 100 planes all equipped with missiles, the power of a full air raid would be roughly comparable to 10 scalpel missiles. Gu Heng could only heave a sigh. But there was no helping it. Hu Ke had even come to offer an uneasy apology to the governor, but what could be done? No one else on the entire planet could probably do that, so being anxious was useless. Gu Heng had no choice but to accept the reality. After tearfully watching Quintet depart, Gu Heng could only return to his office and figure out how to use the grace points at hand. The fixed income for the new month had arrived. This month's grace points totaled 1,307 points. Compared to last month's 1,022, there was once again a significant increase. This increase mainly came from the Viking Valley region, where the Mutual Aid Society had effectively been incorporated into the rule of the Alliance, adding 4 million people to the population. Although the productive capacity of the Viking Valley region was currently terrible, and a considerable portion of the population consisted of refugees and purely a burden, the sheer number of 4 million meant that the grace points increased by a sizable amount. As for other increases, they came from the twin cities absorbing more population and experiencing further growth in productive capacity. Order in the central 3 provinces had been restored, with a slight increase in their monthly income as well. After receiving this sum of grace points, Gu Heng now had 1,708 points in hand. He considered for a moment and allocated 700 grace points for soldier training. He planned to recruit 70,000 soldiers from the Viking Valley region and establish 11 garrison divisions, numbered 1525, all under the command of the Central Group Army. By that time, combined with the existing militia of the Green Valley region and the freshly reorganized 13th Mechanized Brigade and 14th Motorized Infantry Division, which had been rapidly dispatched to the south, Commander Yan Fangxue would have over 200,000 troops at his disposal. With this scale, the question of military strength should largely be resolved. The source of these 70,000 soldiers was not a major issue, as refugees could be enlisted. The training was not a major issue, as the soldier tag system could solve it. The issue of weapons and equipment was a bit more significant, as producing equipment for 70,000 individuals, along with the corresponding artillery and trucks, might take 2 to 3 months to complete. But Gu Heng had time to wait. With the remaining 1,000 grace points, Gu Heng thought it over and decided to build a comprehensive academy. With that, of the 3 types of academy buildings made available to him by the architectural system, he would have constructed them all. The earlier one invests in education, the higher the returns. The comprehensive academy would produce students specialized in trade, jurisprudence, administration, arts, and so forth. Compared to the technical academy, the comprehensive academy could be considered more of a social science institution. Science and technology might be the primary productive force, but as the lands governed by Gu Heng became increasingly vast and the population ever more immense, with the overall scale expanding by several millions in a matter of months, he needed a sufficient number of administrative talents to manage the planet as bureaucrats on his behalf. This was inevitable. Especially since he adopted a highly centralized political system, this was more the case. The Technical Academy provided technological talents, the Comprehensive Academy provided high-quality social science talents, and the Loyal Air Academy ensured the loyalty of the former 2. This was the education system Gu Heng planned for the overall alliance. Further down the line, establishing a complete compulsory education phase would require longer-term investment, but that was something Gu Heng would not personally handle. The Department of Culture and Education under the Alliance government would be responsible for this task. As a result, 1,700 grace points were spent to the last penny, leaving a mere 8 points in hand. To speak of it, receiving a fixed income of over 1,000 grace points every month seemed quite plentiful, but spending them was indeed very quick. Gu Heng was now just waiting for the Green Valley campaign to settle. According to the system's way of doing things, it would have to wait until the situation in the Green Valley region was settled and stabilized before giving a settlement, but it was uncertain when this judgment would be made. He was in urgent need of a large wave of grace points to fill his depleted pool of grace points. However, before the big wave Gu Hang was anticipating arrived, the Phoenix battle group gave him a big surprise. Chapter 307. On the outskirts of Wuxing City, Phoenix Monastery. After more than half a year of construction, the Phoenix Monastery no longer looked like a major building site, at least, not in the core area. The main part of the chapel had been completed, and next to it, an even larger cathedral was under construction, the living quarters had been finished, and the training grounds had been mapped out. Apart from the larger and more majestic parts, the main practical buildings of the monastery were all done. Inside the chapel, there even stood a statue of the emperor, glittering with gold. Indeed, it was cast from gold. Currently, on Rage Owl Star, aside from a portion needed for industrial production, the value of precious metals lay only in their use as decorative items. They held no capacity for currency, savings, or circulation. Using them to decorate the chapel and the divine image of the emperor was just right. And before the divine image of the emperor, a figure, aged yet tall and robust, knelt on one knee, his eyes tightly closed, maintaining this posture for quite some time. Priest Rizzo was always like this. Even as a priest, he spent too long praying with his eyes closed. It hadn't always been this way. Only after coming to Rage Owl Star had his time spent in prayer and attempting to communicate with the Emperor grown longer and longer. The other two members of the Phoenix battle group had felt at a loss for some time now. After 3 consecutive failures of gene seed implant surgeries, their battle group leader had locked himself in the confessional and had not come out since. And their battle group priest was in this state. The atmosphere was oppressive, and anguish and confusion filled their hearts as well. But today seemed a little different. Although the head priest still knelt in prayer before the emperor's statue, the confessional door nearby opened. The battle group leader finally emerged. But this did not bring any reassurance. They could see that Madden's massive frame was stooped, weary, hiding despair. When an ordinary person despairs and acts recklessly, they can cause considerable destruction, let alone a star-faring warrior. They watched the battle group leader with considerable concern as he approached the head priest step by step. They felt that what was about to happen would determine the future destiny of the battle group, but they did not know what it would be. Madden stood behind the head priest, gazing for a long time. During this, his fists clenched several times, only to relax again. Eventually, he let out a deep breath, and like Rizzo, knelt before the emperor's statue, murmuring a prayer before speaking in a disheartened voice. "Priest, over half a year ago, you said you had foreseen that the battle group's lifeline resided on this star named Rage Owl Star." Madden's voice was hoarse and grating. In recent times, he had barely drunk any water, leaving his throat very dry. Priest Rizzo, being questioned, opened his eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Yes, I did have such a revelation. Do you still stand by your revelation?" "Of course, I've never doubted it. Even if..." Maddens took a deep breath, "even if the battle group has become what it is now." At this question, Priest Rizzo did not answer directly. He countered, "Are you blaming me?" Maddens was silent, but the bloodshot look in his eyes as he glared at Rizzo gave away the answer. Rizzo sighed, "It seems you really do blame me, but do you remember exactly what I said at that time?" "You said the hope for saving the battle group lay on Rage Owl Star." "No, that's not what I said." Maddens was startled. A star-faring warrior has a good memory, and he immediately recounted the scene from that time, certain that he had not misremembered. What did the head priest mean? Rizzo continued, "I said, the opportunity for the battle group's rebirth from the ashes lies there, in the person of the governor of that star. Is there any difference?" "Of course, there is." Rizzo's face broke into a smile once more. "Hope has never been in a place, or on a star, it's always been upon a person. I made myself very clear." "But..." Maddens immediately started to speak. "The governor has already done everything within his power to help the battle group, what more can he do?" This indeed was Maddens' own thought, so he held no particular resentment toward Gu Hang. The Phoenix battle group and the governor of Rage Owl Star had always had an equal partnership. They executed commissions for the governor as they deemed fit, and of course, they could refuse if a mission was particularly preposterous. While sacrifices had been made, fighting the enemies of the Imperium, whether followers of the evil god or green Skin Orcs, was a matter of course. In this respect, Governor Gu Hang had never betrayed them. Any intelligence that needed to be clear was clear, any support that needed to be in place was in place. The losses of their battle brothers were caused by combat with the enemy, Mr. Gu could not be blamed for that. While they fulfilled missions for the governor, Rage Owl Star had reciprocated, building the monastery for the battle group, allowing them free choice among the planet's youth for candidates. When they needed surgical equipment, the latest was bought, they replenished their arsenal, and they were even gifted a precious set of Terminator power armor. What more was there to say? Gu Heng had done all that he could. What more could Rage Owl Star offer for the battle group's development? Chapter 308. It's no use giving anything. What they're missing now, most of all, are people, fighting brothers, genetic seeds. Does Mr. Gu have any ways to help with this matter? At that moment, Priest Carizo said, Mr. Gu has indeed done everything within his power to help the present Phoenix battle group. But for the future, for the group that will be saved, it is far from enough. He can do more. What are you implying? Maddens asked eagerly, have you foreseen something else? There are only 4 of us left in the group. We must be united for the survival of the group. Why are you being so secretive at a time like this? I just don't know how to say it, Rizzo sighed. What is the most urgent help the group needs now? Is it genetic seeds? Maddens was so confused that even this answer was given hesitantly. Yes, now that we need genetic seeds, why shouldn't we seek help from Mr. Gu? Hey! Maddens was utterly bewildered. He might be able to help us in countless ways, but this one. I've said, I foresaw that the group's salvation would fall upon Mr. Gu. Since we're now at the brink of life and death, and we need genetic seeds to save our group, then let's go to him. You mean to say, Mr. Gu has our genetic seeds? Madden's eyes narrowed as a myriad of thoughts raced through his mind. Rizzo once again did not answer directly but posed another question, Maddens, are you willing to pay any price for the survival of the group? Of course. Maddens replied firmly, but what does that have to do with? Rizzo waved his hand to prevent him from continuing and looked toward the other 2 parties present. And you? Certainly willing. The 2 veteran warriors were equally resolute. Rizzo nodded. He stood up, faced the 3 brothers, and said, then let's go, let us meet His Excellency the Governor, see the savior of our group, and see how he will save our group. 4 interstellar warriors, visiting together, armed to the teeth, gave Gu Heng quite a fright. But after hearing the news, he still received them in his own office hall. The Gu Heng of today was no longer the one from before. In just half a year, not only had his power expanded rapidly, his personal strength had skyrocketed as well. In the system, on his personal character interface, he was a level 5 spiritual energy user. In the battle aboard the Quintet 3 months ago against the Beastman Fleet General, he even played a key role. He had assessed himself and concluded that, at this level, he might not even fear a one-on-one battle with Maddens, the leader of the battle group. Of course, being ganged up on by 4 interstellar warriors might still pose a problem, but who said he couldn't run if he couldn't fight? The city was full of his people. The reason Gu Heng thought of this first was mainly because the interstellar warriors came so aggressively and suddenly. Not knowing what had happened, he naturally considered the worst. Of course, when he actually met them, Gu Heng's face still beamed with a bright smile. He welcomed the interstellar warriors first, then without any further probing or beating around the bush, he got straight to the point and asked, I wonder what brings you here today? Is there anything specific you need my help with? The Phoenix Battle Group has made great efforts and sacrifices for the rebuilding and revitalization of Rage Owl Star, something I will never forget. Whatever you need, feel free to ask. I will fulfill it if I can. Facing Mr. Gu's question, the 4 formidable interstellar warriors, however, didn't open their mouths. They didn't know what to say. The 2 warriors didn't say much, they were just there to witness. Today they only brought eyes and ears, not mouths. As for the 2 leaders, Madden's gaze turned to Rizzo, only to find that the latter had no intention of speaking. This had always been Rizzo's stance, you are the group leader, so all decisions should rightfully be made by you. Was this a good thing? At least Maddens didn't think so. He only felt weighed down by the heavy burden. Sometimes, he wished someone else could make some decisions for him, whether the decision was right or wrong. All he needed to do was follow, execute with all his might, and that would have been fine. It would certainly be countless times easier than now. Putting away his thoughts, he still had to shoulder the responsibility of the group leader and seek a way out for the survival of the group. Maddens was similarly not adept at beating around the bush, so he too spoke plainly, we are here for the survival of the Phoenix Battle Group, and we need your Excellency's help. Oh! Gu Hang had already let go of most of his worries. Asking for help, hey? You should have started with that. With all the bluster, I thought there had been a leak and you were coming to finish me off. Hold on, no, there's no leak. I am a loyal subject of the Empire. However, Gu Hang was a bit puzzled again. He said, you need help, of course, there's no problem, but forgive my bluntness, I've always been grateful for your sacrifices and have been trying my best to help you. I don't know where else I can provide assistance. If there's anything I haven't done well, feel free to speak up, I'm all ears. Taking a deep breath, Madden said, we need a genetic seed. What? Genetic seed? To me? Lucky I wasn't drinking water just now, otherwise I wouldn't guarantee I wouldn't spit it out in one go. Clearing his throat twice to cover the shock in his eyes, he asked with feigned calm, this. I understand what a genetic seed is, but how can I help you? I don't understand. Maddens was somewhat deflated. Yet, how could a military governor help with something related to genetic seeds? His gaze involuntarily drifted back to Priest Rizzo beside him. Priest Rizzo still had a silent demeanor. Anger rising in his heart, Maddens blurted out in frustration, 8 months ago, we were wandering through the stars. He talked about what happened then. About their plight, how Priest Rizzo had foreseen that the salvation of the battle group lay with Gu Hang, and their arrival on Rage Owl Star. He even included the earlier conversation he had with Priest Rizzo inside the Phoenix Monastery, not sparing any details. Priest, weren't you all quiet? Then I'll lay it all out. Priest Rizzo's expression remained unchanged as he let Madden spill everything. Gu Hang looked at the High Priest of the Phoenix with disbelief, unable to comprehend the rationale behind all this. But in reality, his mind was swiftly calculating. 8 months ago, that must have been when he activated the Phoenix Will Die event. Was it the power of the system that mobilized Priest Rizzo to foresee certain events through prayer? What was the reasoning behind this? You, a priest, were led to Rage Owl Star, led to me, during prayers to the Emperor? The implications hidden behind this entire event sent chills down Gu Hang's spine. However, an even more pressing issue was right before him. After Maddens had finished recounting everything, he looked at him with eyes full of expectation. Not just Maddens, the 2 star warriors behind him also shared the same demeanor. And how should he respond? Genetic seeds, hey. I could give them 100 grace points each, right? For him, who had just activated the event at that time, 100 grace points were impossible to come by, even if he had them, it would have been exceedingly painful to part with. But for the him of now, with a fixed monthly income of 1300, 100 points were nothing. But the question is, should he give them? If he admitted it, what risks would it bring, and what impact would it have? Chapter 309. In an era beyond historical verification, the Emperor who walked among humans created the genetic seeds and the starfighters. Now, that technology has long been lost. In the current era, genetic seeds can only be born from the starfighters themselves. Moreover, due to long periods of separation, subtle differences have gradually emerged between the gene seeds of each ancient starfighter battle group, and after completing gene surgery to create new starfighters, their characteristics also differ to a certain extent. The Phoenix battle group's accumulation of gene seeds over many long years was destroyed. According to what Maddens once narrated about the history of the battle groups, in the last battle of their century-long penance expedition, their flagship, which carried both the battle group's armory and gene bank, ceased to exist completely in a massive explosion. Now, if one wishes to see the Phoenix's gene seeds again, apart from those that could be harvested after the death of the 7 living warriors, the only remaining source would be the Imperial Gene Bank. Starfighter battle groups too are required to pay taxes, known as the Gene Seed Levy. They need to regularly surrender 10% of the new seeds produced during this period, and the Mechanical Cult Guild and the Empire's State Church check the purity of the battle group's gene seeds to ensure everything is in order. Those seeds that pass inspection are added to the Imperial Gene Bank, which are generally used to establish new battle groups. Thus, in theory, the Phoenix battle group could request assistance from the Empire to rebuild their ranks using the gene seeds they've surrendered as tax in the past. But in reality, this is impossible. Firstly, the Phoenix had submitted applications, but to no avail. The Empire had no such rule, there was never a regulation stating that a battle group suffering heavy losses could replenish from its past seed tax. The Empire also had no motivation to do this. Why strengthen an old battle group? From Gu Hang's perspective, if he were a member of the Imperial Supreme Council, he wouldn't agree either. The starfighter battle groups within the Empire, according to sacred scripture, are similar to independent warlords. They mostly have their own mother planets, which do not pay taxes. Starfighter battle groups generally obey orders, but there are many who follow the directive rather than the proclamation. The Empire doesn't even have a dedicated authority with jurisdiction over starfighters, so mobilizing them is like how Gu Hang interacts with Phoenix. Orders have to be issued, contracts made, and if they genuinely don't want to do it or don't commit fully, there are no conventional means to punish or restrict them unless they're branded as traitors after a fallout. And honestly, pinning a traitor label on someone isn't that easy. Which historic battle group doesn't have a band of comrades, good friends, planets they've saved, and so on? All are connections, all are political backers. It's not as simple as wanting to brand them and doing it. Afterward, if you do, the parent group and other allied groups will come forward to cry foul. If there's solid evidence, that's a different matter, but if there's even a slight controversy, it's not doable. Considering this, why support an old battle group? If there's a real need, just create a new one and it's done. The old groups can figure it out themselves. Especially the Phoenix Battle Group, a group with a past offense and who had actually been sentenced to a penance expedition, whose political connections were almost entirely wiped out, should not expect support. It's better to build a new group with the effort that would take to save the Phoenix. New groups won't come with a pile of historical issues that are difficult to resolve. Having lost hope of obtaining new seeds from the Empire, they could only rely on themselves. The sacrifice of 3 warriors yielded 3 seeds full of hope, but all surgeries failed. This means that the only seeds of the Phoenix battle group left are those contained within the 4 who are still alive. Theoretically, it shouldn't be possible to find them anywhere else. In this situation, Gu Hang produced one. What did that mean? Was he in cahoots with someone high up and managed to acquire a genetic seed, or what? There was no excuse Gu Hang could fabricate that would pass muster. He couldn't claim that the Imperial Gene Bank authorized him to have a batch of Phoenix seeds. That would be ludicrous, as nothing of the sort had ever happened in the Empire's history counted in millennia. But could he continue to feign ignorance and not acknowledge it? That didn't seem right either. Gu Hang had been able to exchange for genetic seeds for half a year now. To say he wasn't eager to try it was impossible. He had been scheming for an opportunity to use his ability to exchange genetic seeds. If he hadn't been thinking about this, why would he have bought 20 sets of powered armor at a high price in the past when the beautiful Lady Convoy was present, if not for that day? According to Gu Hang's original plan, he wanted to wait until Wu Jiarong managed to free some time so that this priestess from the Mechanical Cult Guild could research how to perform gene implantation surgery. This task doesn't necessarily require a starfighter. In fact, when the Empire wants to establish a new battle group, it's the Mechanical Cult Guild that operates. The only slight problem is that Wu Jiarong isn't specialized in genetic engineering. Compared to her, Hu Ke would be a better choice, but considering the issue of trust, Wu Jiarong still remains the best option. Once she had studied it, then Gu Hang could find some young people with qualifications and potential, train them to T1 level using the soldier badge system, and then exchange for the genetic seeds. The total cost would add up to 211 points of blessing, plus the life of a promising youth as the price for Wu Jiarong to practice. Even if there were failures, after a few attempts, they should be able to succeed eventually. Chapter 310. Anyway, the genetic seeds aren't precious to Gu Hang, they're just 100 points of grace. Nowadays, to extract a technology requires far more than this amount of money. The only concern, in fact, is how to explain it after it's created. If now, taking advantage of this opportunity, and reaching an agreement with the Phoenix Battle Group, that would be almost a perfect situation. Moreover, they had come over, almost clearly stating the situation, and the room for feigning ignorance was already slim. Sitting upon his planetary governor's throne, Gu Hang looked down at the 4-star warriors, his gaze especially focused on Maddens and Rizzo. He could see the relief and tension on Maddens's face. He could also see that Priest Rizzo had opened his eyes at some point, his expression now filled with anticipation and even a touch of zeal. Recalling what Maddens had described, how they were guided to Rage Owl Star by praying to the Emperor through Rizzo, he clenched his teeth, deciding to take a gamble. He had thought it through. In a desperate situation, these Phoenix individuals, whose minds were fully occupied with how to continue their battle group's existence, might really abandon their quest for the origins when faced with genetic seeds that, while of unknown provenance, were indeed related to the Phoenix descendants. They might focus solely on the survival of their battle group. The Star Warriors were called the Emperor's Death Angels, and this was true, they all valued loyalty highly. But, were there no rebellions among Star Warriors? That is not the case. Rebellious battle groups, the chaotic Starry Warriors gang, these were all tangible realities. Aren't they all factions that split off from the loyal Star Warriors? With the Phoenix now as they are, it's conceivable that to fulfill their wish of continuing the battle group's legacy, they would have a decent chance of agreeing to direct treason. Not to mention, what Gu Heng would ask them to do next was not even to betray anyone. Furthermore, as Gu Heng looked at Rizzo, he always felt that this priest might become key, and he might even become an inside supporter. With these thoughts, Gu Heng took a deep breath and spoke solemnly to the 4 Star Warriors below, "If that's what you say, I indeed have a potential solution that might help you." He made an opening statement but did not get into specifics, leaving room for negotiation. He spoke slowly, and did not forget to observe the expressions of Maddens and Rizzo. The yearning on Maddens's face instantly filled with hope. The commander looked up at him with eager eyes, full of anticipation for what he would say next. And the fervor on Rizzo's face became even more pronounced. The reactions of the two reassured Gu Heng somewhat. Their first concern was not why can this planetary governor help us obtain genetic seeds, but we can agree to any condition, which in itself explained a lot. He continued, but this matter is too significant and unique, involving some secrets. It will also cost me greatly, which exceeds my level of support for you. So, if you need this kind of special help, I need you to agree to a few conditions. Maddens eagerly interjected, "Name it." "I will agree. No matter what the conditions, I will agree." He indeed had prepared himself to make any sacrifice. Gu Heng raised a finger, "First, the Phoenix Battle Group must pledge allegiance to me." Just the first condition, and Maddens was already stunned. A battle group pledging allegiance to a planetary governor? Had such a thing ever happened in the entire history of mankind? Weren't planetary governors civilians appointed by battle groups to manage their planets, at best serving as stewards, to be replaced if they weren't up to the task? Now, a battle group was to pledge allegiance to a planetary governor? He found it somewhat unacceptable. Gu Heng's expression became grave. "I think I need to make myself clearer, this goes beyond the level of aid for allies. You should understand that. I can only pay the price for my own people, for my true own people." He paused, then leaned forward, fixing his gaze on Maddens. "I'm ready to pay the price for the rejuvenation of the battle group, but the premise is, it must be my battle group." "So, Commander Maddens, you said you were willing to pay any price. Does that still stand?" Maddens looked again towards Rizzo. All he saw was the encouraging look in Priest Rizzo's eyes. "I agree." Maddens lowered his noble head. "Then swear the oath," Gu Heng said. If he had already agreed, what more was there to say? Maddens knelt on one knee before Gu Heng, who was seated on the throne in front of the Emperor's golden statue, and also bowed his proud head. Following his lead, Rizzo and the 2 other Star Warriors also knelt. Next, it should be the oath-taking segment. But Commander Maddens pursed his lips tightly. He didn't know how to begin. At this moment, Priest Rizzo spoke, leading the battle group in the oath, chanting the prayer, "Is my duty. I'll do it." Maddens breathed a sigh of relief. At critical moments, the High Priest was somewhat useful, at least taking over the most awkward part for him. But soon, he couldn't muster a smile. "From this day forth, I am of the Phoenix." The first sentence uttered by Rizzo made the DNA of all 3 stir. It was the oath of the Phoenix Battle Group, which every battle brother must recite by heart upon formally joining the group, swearing allegiance in front of all their battle brothers to the Emperor. And afterward, this oath would be the preface to almost every banquet, gathering, and prayer session of the battle group. They had long since learned it by heart. In the past, and including now, it was always Priest Rizzo who led such prayer activities. Everyone was very familiar with it, so the 3 of them almost instinctively started reciting it along with him. "From this day forth, I am of the Phoenix. I am a sword of the Emperor and also a sword of Gu Heng." Their eyes went wide with disbelief, staring at Rizzo. "What the hell? You just changed the battle group's oath? If you're going to swear allegiance, why mess with an oath that has been passed down for thousands of years? And hey, how about consulting us first?" However, Priest Rizzo looked at them with a resolute and fervent expression, clearly prompting them to recite along with him. What could Maddens and the remaining 2 warriors do? The situation had progressed this far, was there still room to stand up and say they refused? They hesitated for a moment but ultimately, stiff-necked, they continued to recite along with the high priest. I am a sword of the Emperor and also a sword of Gu Hang. I am a shield of the Emperor and also a shield of Gu Hang. I shall bring death to the enemies of humanity, I shall bring back glory for the Emperor and Gu Hang. I shall sacrifice and die for the Emperor, and be reborn of fire because of Gu Hang. From this day forth, I am the Phoenix, eternally warring on. Gu Hang felt awkward listening from above. Having his name forcefully added to the oath, it sounded cringeworthy no matter how he listened. Besides the awkwardness, a more core point was guilt. What merit did he have to be equated with the Emperor in an oath? If others heard this, wouldn't it provoke serious trouble? But he also couldn't bring himself to stop it, and he couldn't quite pinpoint his feelings about it. There was no way he didn't feel a bit of dark pleasure. A battle group was swearing allegiance to him, even changing the group's oath. How could he not be pleased? Although this battle group only had 4 people left, from this moment on, he could use the repeatable event to exchange genetic seeds without any reservations. With the seal broken, was there any concern about the speed of powering up troops for someone hanging by a thread? However, Gu Hang didn't let the euphoria cloud his judgment. He still remembered his priority. After the Phoenix battle group finished the oath, Gu Hang raised his second finger. Chapter 311. When Gu Hang raised his second finger and proposed his second condition, Madden's was already numb. Even the kind of oath that he had just taken, chanting along with the priest of the battle group, what other condition could there be that he couldn't agree to? And indeed, the second condition that followed, along with the third condition that came closely after, didn't seem too demanding not from their post-oath perspective. Gu Hang's second condition was that the battle group must unconditionally obey all of his orders. No problem, obedience is obedience, what else does pledging loyalty mean? However, it was the third condition that gave them some worry. This condition stated that all future new members of the Phoenix battle group, from recruitment to training, would be handled solely by Gu Hang. Essentially, this was to take over the training of T1 level soldiers, as well as training political officers at Loyal Air Academy. The former was to raise the trainees' basic qualifications as much as possible because according to the traditional ways of cultivating interstellar warriors, bringing in a boy just over 10 years old would mean at least 5 to 6 years of training, or 7 to 8 years at most, to select the best out of the good ones upon reaching near adulthood. That was too slow. Gu Hang couldn't wait for such a slow nurturing process. He needed to produce soldiers rapidly. By directly spending gift points, he could bring talented boys up to the T1 level, which is a far more reliable method. Not everyone could be trained to the T1 level. During the times Gu Hang used the soldier card function for training, he had often come across situations where no further enhancement was possible. That was related to the soldier's innate potential. But that was also good, in a way. If out of 100 boys, there are those who could be raised to the T1 level by the soldier card, it would prove that their innate potential was quite impressive. If they didn't even possess the potential to endure the upgrade to T1 level by the soldier card, then there was no point wasting gene seeds on them, nor their own lives. This indirectly served as a rather useful selection feature. Those who were eliminated, those who couldn't be promoted to the T1 stage, wouldn't go to waste either. If they didn't have the aptitude to become interstellar warriors, they could well enter the 10th Special Warfare Brigade to become Special Forces. Being a stormtrooper was also quite honorable. As for the regular training, a visit to Loyal Air Academy was certainly necessary. Before those young men became interstellar warriors, they must first receive proper education in loyalty. Madden's had doubts about this, not because of ideological training. The entire battle group had already sworn allegiance to the military governor. What else was there to fret about? What worried him was whether the military governor knew how to train interstellar warriors. Gu Hang had no explanations for this, just as he wouldn't explain how he intended to obtain gene seeds. As for how to deal with Madden's doubts, that was actually quite simple. Gu Hang said a few words to him, his speech was very tactful, but the meaning was very direct. Next month he planned to conduct the gene seed implantation surgery. Did Madden's have the capability with the regular methods of cultivating interstellar warriors to train a suitable candidate within a month? Even if picking from those more than 200 youths already undergoing training at the Phoenix Monastery, none suitable could be found. It's not that the training method for interstellar warriors was inadequate, but the problem was the scarcity of training time. The 3 consecutive failures of surgery in the past were not only due to the gene seeds not being properly preserved, resulting in decreased viability, but also another significant problem was the inadequate quality of the candidates. If you can't handle it, then I might as well do it myself. In the end, Maddens had no choice but to accept. After seeing off the 4 members of the Phoenix battle group, Gu Heng, left alone, unusually asked someone to bring him a glass of wine and sat drinking by himself. He did not show emotions like excitement or happiness on his face, but he was indeed very pleased. The complete allegiance of the Phoenix battle group was of great significance. The core point was certainly not those 4 veterans. If it were just about borrowing their strength, there was no need to insist on their allegiance, a normal mission commission would suffice. The greater value of this event was that Gu Heng could finally use the gene seed exchange function without too much concern to rapidly produce his own soldiers. Unleash the seal. Interstellar warriors are by no means a cost-effective type of soldier. The more than 200 gift points required to cultivate an interstellar warrior, plus the cost of a set of equipment, could arm 1 or 2 infantry divisions. And yet a single interstellar warrior might not be able to defeat an entire division. But that's not how it should be measured. Many problems that infantry divisions can't solve need top-tier solo combatants like interstellar warriors. In the battle at the Quintet, if it weren't for the efforts of Maddens and the other 3, giving Gu Heng 4 more infantry divisions wouldn't have mattered, they wouldn't have been able to prevent the Beastman Overlord from destroying the core engine room. However, as impatient as Gu Heng was, he couldn't immediately start producing soldiers. He had run out of gift points previously. But no matter, things could be prepared in advance. Selecting young teenagers with potential as reserve warriors, tossing them into Loyal Air Academy for learning, all these could be started in advance. A month quickly passed. The situation underwent many new changes. In the Viking Valley region, a sizable battle erupted. The Central Group Army's efforts to cut through, compress, and eliminate the jungle were effective. The aberrant beasts hiding in the jungle became desperate. Chapter 312. Oh, rather than saying the aberrant beasts panicked, it's more accurate to say that the puppeteers behind them tried to make a desperate last stand. They clearly knew that if things continued this way, the eradication operation involving 200,000 soldiers and millions of civilians, would genuinely wipe out the jungles of the Viking Valley region. It didn't mean that the vast jungles would be completely deforested, but at least they would be cut into fragments. In the areas where it was certain that there were no aberrant beast nests developing, they could be left alone after clearing the surroundings, and for the jungles where aberrant beasts existed, complete destruction awaited. The fully powered synthetic starch factories constructed one after another could digest the destroyed trees on the spot, transforming them into synthetic starch needed by refugees. This greatly relieved the pressure on food supplies. Furthermore, with the recent conclusion of the autumn harvest, the Alliance's food reserves were still in a healthy state. Unwilling to sit and wait for death, the Nature Salvation Society gathered nearly 500,000 monsters of various types from the jungles across the Viking Valley region. But even so, they still suffered defeat. They knew that facing the enemy head-on, despite their vast numbers, they stood no chance. In war, quantity is clearly not the primary factor, firepower is. While fully evolved aberrant beasts had the pus spewers with a shooting range almost equal to firearms and there were bio-artillery, overall, the vast numbers were still made up of the ordinary aberrant beasts. Those ordinary ones could only fight in close combat, mere cannon fodder. A head-on attack was like serving themselves on a platter, but they had no other choice. A wave of aberrant beasts gathered and charged out of the jungle in vast numbers, attempting to draw the attention of the Central Group Army in this way. Immediately after, they launched multiple attacks from other areas of the woodland. However, the final result was still a failure. Almost all of the aberrant beasts that set out were wiped out in the end. At first, Yan Fangxiu did have his attention diverted when he detected the massive wave of aberrant beasts. His main force confronted them head-on. But after realizing that the enemy was moving on all fronts, launching multiple attacks, his response was swift. Firstly, the forces at the front launched a fiercer attack, annihilating the enemy they faced. Secondly, the reserve troops mobilized extensively along the entire front, quickly providing support to multiple points of enemy attack. These troops were essentially the 15th to 25th Garrison Divisions trained up in the past month. Their equipment wasn't fully in place yet, but they were adequate for temporary use. Thirdly, the various militiamen and armed civilian self-defense forces had become quite outstanding. They resisted on the spot, waiting for reinforcements to arrive. And as a rule, the first reinforcement to arrive would be Air Force formations. Currently, the Alliance's Air Force had nearly 40 Wind Falcons in an aviation squadron. Formed in teams of 3, upon hearing the situation facing the Viking Valley region, they all set off. They circled above the Viking Valley, ready to move instantly wherever air support was needed. With the assistance of these aviation soldiers, who acted very swiftly and had a broad combat radius, the attacks launched by the mutant creatures hardly achieved any significant results. Of course, the Air Force was just the Air Force and couldn't produce a decisive effect. But as long as they could successfully delay the monsters' attack rhythm, that was enough. Once the Central Group Army on the ground was freed up, the rapid response units from various places could provide support along their route. The Green Valley region is a massive peninsula-shaped area, with its widest span being over 1,000 kilometers. It's impossible to cover everything merely with the manpower at hand. But there is no need to. With a population of only several million, it's enough to establish a few larger settlements. There's no need to stretch so far and create such a long defense line, unnecessarily increasing the difficulty of defense. A few targeted counter-offensive annihilation battles, and these aberrant beasts were almost completely exterminated. Subsequently, the Alliance Army, in accordance with the plan, divided part of the rapid deployment troops along the Green Valley region's own pathways to begin moving south. They would set up evacuation points along the way to help the civilians still stranded in the South Green Valley region migrate northward and flee. This migration was semi-coercive. Ordinary civilians were one thing, but the many plantation owners still in South Green Valley region were the biggest obstacle. Since the outbreak of the disaster, the plantations in South Green Valley that have managed to persevere to this point are either relatively isolated, having encountered little trouble so far, or have managed to hold on by sticking together, or are just so large that they are not easily breached. But no matter the circumstance, convincing plantation owners to easily abandon their assets and head north along with a massive number of hired laborers is very difficult. In this regard, the Alliance expressed respect, but then demanded that all civilians leave. If the population migrates but leaves behind the plantation owners and their families, you're free to do as you please. If you seek death on your own, the Alliance can hardly save you. However, if anyone dares to incite the hired laborers to oppose the Alliance Army, preventing them from leaving, or spreads false rumors that disaster will strike if they move north, any such acts of resistance will be treated as hostile. The Alliance Army will strike with full force. In any case, the migration of the southern population didn't go smoothly, often resulting in bloodshed. Nonetheless, the army enforced Governor Guhang's will with iron and fire. Despite any disturbances, the plantation owners had no chance of stopping the process. On Rage Owl Star, Governor Guhang's will was an irresistible force, the will of the era. No one could resist. During this month, at researcher Hu Kei's lab, which Guhang had been attending to, they achieved breakthroughs in deciphering the spoils recovered by the special forces of the 10th Brigade. Hu Kei personally sought out Guhang to share the good news, stating that he had located the target site. Indeed, just as they had anticipated, the Nature Salvation Society did possess a complete and undamaged spiritualized gas field, a relic from the pre-war era. Moreover, their primary current research was aimed at finding out what kind of disaster had befallen the spiritualized gas fields on Rage Owl Star in the pre-war era, and how it had opened the chasms of the abyss. They were trying to replicate this process. They'd already made some progress, which involved a large number of lives and a massive-scale sacrificial ritual. The rapid breeding and loss of control of the aberrant beasts was related to their research. The spiritualized gas field discovered by the Nature Salvation Society wasn't particularly large, but the energy density in any spiritualized gas field was incredibly high. Its location was at the southernmost tip of the Green Valley Peninsula or Green Valley subcontinent and about 80 kilometers southwest underwater. The Nature Salvation Society had likely constructed a mining site and laboratory there. Hu Kei asserted that if he wanted to understand what his student truly intended to do, he needed more time to study it. To which Guhang was rather indifferent. If Hu Kei wanted to research, then let him. As for solving the problem, Hu Kei need not concern himself too much. When the time came, Guhang would dispatch a special task force to destroy everything there with orbital strikes, under the cover of the Air Force. Destroying the spiritualized gas field was out of the question, an unrealistic notion. However, he could obliterate all of the facilities and personnel that the Nature Salvation Society had set up there, severing their ability to continue exploiting the site. Of course, not just yet. The Alliance's air forces were currently too occupied to spare the effort, as fighting was ongoing in the Viking Valley region. Moreover, the Special Operations Brigade was somewhat short on manpower. Let those cultists live a little longer. Once he could spare the resources, Guhang would deal them a harsh blow. And after this month passed, the monthly fixed income was distributed. This time, it was 1,432 points, an increase over the previous month. After receiving the funds, Gu Heng did not hesitate to invest nearly all of it into the development of the Phoenix. Just in time before 12 o'clock. Next, I'll be writing tomorrow's noon update. Chapter 313. After receiving the 1,432 points of grace this month, Gu Heng now had a total of 1440 grace points. With these grace points, even if they were all invested in the Phoenix, he could create about 7 Phoenixes in their ultimate state. Of course, this was hardly possible in reality, considering the losses along the way. Even if Gu Heng was optimistic, it was impossible to succeed with all 7. Moreover, before that, suitable candidates for training had to be selected. The selection process was actually quite straightforward. Firstly, over the past month, Gu Heng had picked out 150 teenagers between the ages of 16 and 18 from across the Union. Some criteria were involved, such as background, past experiences, physical condition, and an assessment of their psychological state and willpower. In short, there was a whole array of assorted requirements. These requirements were not just concocted by Gu Heng out of thin air, but were based on suggestions from Madans and Rizzo, who had established a scoring system from various aspects, with different weights for each item, to evaluate the 150 people they had selected. On this basis, these 150 had already undergone one round of selection. Now, with enough grace points in his hands, Gu Heng was about to start the second round and the several consecutive rounds of selection that followed. First, all candidates were trained to the T4 level. This cost Gu Heng 17 grace points. Later, when attempting to train them all to T3, some were unable to proceed. This was normal, indicating that some of them didn't have the potential to reach that level. They were divided into 15 groups to be upgraded one by one. 6 groups couldn't make it, so they were divided again. Although this wasn't the most efficient method, it didn't matter. Gu Heng wasn't exactly obsessed with utmost efficiency. In the end, 9 people were eliminated, leaving the rest to be promoted to T3 level. This cost 141 grace points. Truth be told, this ratio was quite high, suggesting that the initial selection might have been quite good. However, during the elevation to T2, the rate of elimination soared, and in the end, only 47 succeeded in advancing. To promote them, Gu Heng spent 470 grace points. Finally, Gu Heng saw that only 3 people were qualified to be upgraded to T1. At this rate, Gu Heng couldn't help but exclaim that finding someone with the qualifications to become an interstellar warrior was indeed difficult. Out of the 150 carefully selected teenagers, only 3 could be trained to the T1 level. No wonder the Phoenix had 3 complete failures in their surgeries. They had only selected 400 to 500 teenagers for training. Not to mention that the Phoenix didn't have enough time to train those teenagers, even if they had been given ample time, and the gene seeds remained fully active. Gu Heng was not optimistic about their chances of success. The Phoenix didn't have any cheats and couldn't simply select the best candidates as Gu Heng had effortlessly done. They could only observe the level of those teenagers through approximately 6 months of training and guess the best 3. Out of the 500, maybe only about 10 genuinely had potential, many had potential that might not fully materialize during training. No wonder mature battle groups needed an entire planet to provide recruits, and a considerable number of them would resort to brutal elimination when selecting new soldiers, even using methods such as battle royale and gladiatorial combat. They needed a vast number of teenagers to participate in the recruitment process and undergo the most severe culling. Compared to the preciousness of gene seeds, the lives of some ordinary teenagers were negligible. A low margin for error? Then select 10 out of 100,000, surviving through combat and harsh elimination pushes one to tap into their potential. And for those whose potential remained untapped, whether they died or got eliminated, the interstellar warriors felt no pity. Regardless of whether the methods the interstellar warriors used to select recruits were advanced or backward and brutal, they were certainly not as effective as having a cheat. Gu Heng hadn't expected that his soldier card system would come in handy like this. Although the success rate of surgery for those at T2 was actually not bad, Gu Heng had no intention of squandering resources on them. Rather than that, he preferred to give the precious 100-point gene seeds to the 3 most exceptional individuals. Gu Heng upgraded all 3 youngsters to the T1 level. This cost him 300 grace points. Then, Gu Heng spent another 300 grace points to exchange for 3 gene seeds. All the preparatory work was thus completed, and what was left was the surgery itself. The entire process, if also including the training for the special military role of political commissar, ended up costing a total of 1369 grace points. Gu Heng's grace point balance had once again fallen to double digits. It looked like a lot, but when averaged out, each candidate for Interstellar Warrior cost over 400 grace points, which was double what had been anticipated. But the account shouldn't be settled like this. First off, not a single one of those precious, exceptionally talented young people died during the selection process. Furthermore, even the eliminated ones each had their uses. Even the 9 youngsters who didn't make it to T3, whom Gu Heng couldn't be bothered to train as political commissars, were simply sent to regular boot camps. Chapter 314. But even so, these 9 least capable boys should still stand out in boot camp, belonging to those who the various units would vie to have when replenishing their ranks. After all, even those who had undergone soldier badge system training in boot camp are generally at T5 level. These 9 boys had at least reached T4. The remaining 141 would all be supplemented into the Special Combat Brigade. Before this, the Special Combat Brigade had only about 100 people and was in dire need of new recruits. Out of the 141 added, at least they were T3 level, consistent with the current level of Special Combat soldiers. There were also 47 who had reached T2 level, which was much stronger than the average Special Combat soldier. Thus, the strength of the Special Combat Brigade was replenished to about 230 people, barely forming 2 Special Combat battalions. It was precisely because the eliminated boys could be put to immediate use that Gu Heng selected boys aged between 16–18 when screening candidates below him. Although boys of this age group still had room to grow and would still be considered as junior soldiers in the troops, colloquially referred to as child soldiers. But as long as it wasn't child's play. Of course, everyone else in this group of boys was incidental, the crucial ones were those 3 chosen children. Gu Heng now looked forward to their future with great anticipation. Peleites Anatole came from the Green Valley region. He was the son of a serf. As a youth, he had a relatively good nutrition because his mother was slightly attractive and had a special relationship with the plantation owner's family. His father must have known about it early on, but kept silent. For a long time, Anatole himself was unaware. He occasionally heard whispers and rumors, but he brushed them off as mere silly insults from other boys during fights. At least, that's what he told himself. But this year, disaster struck, and the plantation disbanded. His father decided to head north, taking his family of 5 including his 2 younger sisters to seek refuge. Their family had good luck, reaching the Biking Valley region just as the refugee camp was established. Contagious diseases hadn't spread there, and after a short stay in the camp, they were relocated to the central province and settled in Wuxing City. It was during this transition that he overheard a quarrel between his parents. The gist of it was his mother lamenting their challenging life, questioning why they hadn't followed their old master, which resulted in his father calling her shameless. In turn, she furiously retorted, arguing that if not for her, how could his father, with just farming and the meager pay from their master, provide for the family? Anatole didn't want to think about those things anymore. In any event, although his parents hadn't split up yet, the family atmosphere had turned very sour since that quarrel. Both his parents had secured an E5 classification and gone to work in different factories. He and his 2 sisters were allocated E2 and E3 classifications, respectively, and even had the opportunity to attend school. Family life had improved significantly. They had a place to live, enough food to eat, and a warmer, more hopeful future. He didn't understand why, after life had gotten better, the same parents who had never mentioned those things before suddenly erupted into such a quarrel. During 2 months of his parents' Cold War, the day finally came when people with red hats visited the school to select the most promising boys, and he eagerly signed up. On one hand, it was a cool thing to do, on the other, he wanted to leave his home. He didn't know how to solve the family conflicts, but avoiding them was a more comfortable option. Many of his classmates were weeded out after simple tests, with very few passing, but he was one of the few. After being selected, the Red Hats visited his home. His mother, upon hearing that her child would be taken away, wept bitterly, unwilling to let it happen. His father too, with trembling hands, forced a smile asking if it was possible not to go, if there were any other options. They didn't know what might happen to their child after he left. Instinctively, they didn't want Anatole to leave just as life was getting better. According to his father's plan, after studying for a few more months, 17-year-old Anatole could join him at the military factory producing artillery. Although the work was hard, he would start as a stable E5 level and with seniority could steadily advance for a secure future. Why wasn't that visible path a good one? His mother agreed. Truth be told, seeing his parents who had been cold toward each other for months suddenly clinging to one another, united in opinion, made him even more certain of his decision. If his departure could improve the relationship between his parents, then that would be great. But if staying would be better, well. No, there was no staying. He heard the conversation between the Red Hat and his parents. The Red Hat, with a very stern attitude, made it clear that this was a conscription by the Alliance. Failing to follow the conscription policy was a serious violation of the law, subject to severe punishment. Then, softening his tone, he gently explained the Alliance's policy. He described that being a soldier, unlike being forced into service by a landlord or other settlements, came with a rank, benefits and allowances, and was even better than the average worker. It was a promising future. Chapter 315. Moreover, Anat was about to enter a special advancement training class personally established by the governor, a class with rare spots and vast prospects. His future was definitely promising, perhaps even more so than his own. First, the stick, then the carrot, and next, the pie in the sky. After a series of tactics, his parents were persuaded. The most up-to-date novellas are published on Fruit Noello. Anat himself was also persuaded and no longer wished to stay. Besides family trivialities, how could a young person not be interested in a vast but unknown world? Then, amid his mother's tears and his father's reluctant embrace, he left home and was taken to a place on the outskirts of Wuxing City, a monastery. He had heard of this place. According to the townspeople, it was home to the Emperor's Angels, an area off-limits to mortals. There were strict regulations against entry. Violators would be captured and punished with labor, stipend deductions, or even demotion. The latter was a very frightening punishment within the union system. Could it be? I might become an angel? It's quite normal for young people to dream. He anxiously and stiffly awaited his fate, but what transpired afterwards was beyond his comprehension. His training commenced for a week. The content was novel to him, something he had never seen before but was said to be common in the military, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet during this week of training, his peers were continuously divided into different groups. Some were sent away after just a couple of days, while others lasted slightly longer but were also constantly segregated into groups. By the end of the week, only 3 people, including himself, remained in the same group. Moreover, during this period, he distinctly felt that he had undergone tremendous changes. His physical condition had improved dramatically. His abilities in fitness, strength, and agility, which had been moderately above average among his peers, had reached an almost exaggerated level compared to a normal adult within just 1 week. He had mastered many military skills, most of which he had trained in, but at most had only practiced once or twice. However, every skill now felt as natural to him as instinct, and he could use them at will. In his mind, he had also acquired much military knowledge. He had schemed through the material issued in books only once at night as required by the training, but now the knowledge was deeply engraved in his mind. It wasn't just memorization, it also included understanding, as if he had applied this knowledge in practice many times, deeply integrating theory with practice. All these experiences astounded him. Thereafter, he and his peers were taken to Revival City, to a place called Loyal Air Academy, where they underwent another week of training. During this training, he greatly broadened his horizons, even witnessing the legendary governor himself during the first lesson. And in the lessons that followed, it was as if he understood that the rapid growth from the previous period was a blessing from the emperor, a gift from the governor. Loyalty was deeply imprinted in his mind. After the course at Loyal Air Academy concluded, the majority of his classmates were sent to the new recruits camp, said to be joining the Special Forces Brigade, becoming honorable vanguards of special warfare, also known as stormtroopers. As for him and the other 2 in his group, they were brought back to the monastery. Then, he was informed that the next day, he would undergo surgery. He would have the opportunity to become one of the Emperor's Angels, to become the most elite warrior under the governor's command. Chapter 316. Before the surgery began, Anat and his 2 friends were all quite nervous. Even at the beginning, Anat didn't understand what the word surgery really meant. Later on, he figured out that surgery meant to cut open his own body and implant an organ next to his heart. This organ would grow into a second heart over the next few years, and it would also trigger a series of changes in his body, eventually resulting in 18 superhuman organs. Anat pictured that scene in his mind, and then he shivered all over. Quite terrifying. However, he quickly calmed down. Even he himself was a little surprised by this. He had thought he would be too scared to go on. It seemed that the significant changes brought about by the short period of training were not just physical and skill-based, but also psychological and willpower-related. Anat didn't find anything wrong with that. Of course, he preferred a braver version of himself. His two companions went in first, and it was finally his turn. Lying on the neat and clean operating table, Anat saw an old yet robust man standing by his side. Anat recognized him. This was Priest Rizzo, an angel of the Phoenix. The priest's gentle voice resounded in his ear, "Don't be nervous, it will be over soon. I've seen your performance, you're already excellent, and you will make it through smoothly." Anat nodded. The voice of Priest Rizzo, seemingly carrying a special power, truly stabilized his mind a lot. The surgery began. Maddens, who was standing outside the operating room, waited for Rizzo to come out. "How did it go?" "No problem, it went smoothly." "All three of them?" "Yes, all three." A deep sense of joy surged into his brain, and a rich smile irresistibly appeared on Maddens's face. Why shouldn't he smile? The issue that had worried him for so long finally showed a glimmer of hope. All three were successful. The most dangerous stage of implanting the genetic seed was right after the surgery ended. 70% of the failures occurred in this stage. Of course, successfully undergoing the genetic seed implant surgery did not mean it was totally risk-free. Afterward, the genetic seed would continue to develop in the recruit's body and gradually promote the growth of a dozen superhuman organs. This process could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on the condition of the individual undergoing the surgery. Moreover, there could still be instances of organ rejection leading to death while the new superhuman organs were growing. But overall, the chances were not high. At any rate, the current situation was much better than the 3 surgeries they had previously attempted on their own squadron. Waiting outside the operating room wasn't just Maddens, there were 2 other members of the Phoenix. One of them couldn't help asking, how could it go so smoothly? Why did our 3 surgeries fail before? Another one nudged him, signaling him to shut up. He said resentfully, I just think, if those 3 had also been successful, we would now have 6 new bloods, which means more than the number we had when we landed on Rage Owl Star. That's impossible, Maddens countered, have you seen the level of those 3 young men before the surgery ended? When Maddens mentioned this, the guy who had been grumbling immediately fell silent. Thinking back, it seemed horrifying. How could 17-year-old boys be so powerful? The young men certainly were no match for them, even without armor, they could easily overpower the 3. However, the fact that this was even worth mentioning was already shocking. In reality, recalling his own past, before becoming an interstellar warrior, he had entered the training camp of the Phoenix at the age of 11, endured brutal training, survived the final major selection process, literally escaping death multiple times, and learned much before undergoing the implantation surgery. And these 3 youngsters were much stronger than they had been at the same age. In fact, according to their assessment, these 3 lads, compared to the average interstellar warrior recruit, only lacked the superhuman physical qualities. In other words, as long as they endured the entire transformation surgery process and all the superhuman organs had grown, they would instantly become legitimate combat brothers, lacking only the rich combat experience of these veterans. This was an outrageous assessment. They simply couldn't understand where Governor Guhang had found these 3 little monsters. With such attributes, such tactical expertise, such willpower, they would have no trouble surviving the genetic implant surgery. Genetic seed implant surgery may be difficult, but it's not really a life and death gamble, or else interstellar warriors would have been extinct long ago, right? At this moment, Rizzo finally spoke, since you are so concerned, why don't you come with me and see for yourself? Is that okay? Maddens was somewhat surprised. Of course, it's okay. Their condition is very stable, unlike the previous batch. The genetic seeds provided by the governor have very ideal viability. Chapter 317. When the topic of gene seeds came up, everyone became slightly submerged in silence again. Gene seeds, those mysterious essences, varied more or less from battle group to battle group. This stemmed from the fact that when the Emperor first created the Starfighters, he established 13 different legions with varying tactical demands and strategic goals. These original legions, therefore, possessed inherent differences in their genes from the onset. Subsequent battle groups were established by splitting off from these 13 original legions. Essentially, all the battle groups today originated from those initial 13. The Phoenix Battle Group's gene seed came from the 2nd Legion, the Phoenix Legion. Their inception was extremely early, if not the first to be split off, they were certainly among the 2nd or 3rd. After thousands of years of separation, the Phoenix gene seed had developed slight differences from that of the Phoenix. It was not major, but it was real. The Phoenix seemed to have lost the inheritance of the Phoenix Legion's famous flamboyant swordsmanship and close-quarters combat, yet they had become even more resilient, adept at erupting from desperate situations. This was also reflected in the gene seeds provided by Governor Gu Hang. Previously, Maddens had been worried that the gene seeds Mr. Gu had promised might actually come from another battle group, or even another legion. In fact, that would have been more expected, more logical. Mr. Gu having some means, some channel to acquire scattered gene seeds seemed more plausible than him possessing the discontinued Phoenix seeds. Even so, Maddens was prepared to turn a blind eye if it came down to that. The survival of the battle group was paramount, the origin of the seeds, let it be. The best scenario would be to receive seeds from the Phoenix Legion, the source would be consistent. Even if they were from another original legion, it wouldn't be unacceptable. After all, the differences between a created starfighter and another wouldn't be massive unless one delved into genetic sequencing or surgery. Besides considering the variation in the gene seeds themselves, the individual differences between the starfighters were also significant. Maddens had heard rumors about a ship-based battle group called Blood Shark, notorious for loitering around the Empire's border star sectors without a home planet, scraping by on various levies. Their gene seed was said to originate from the 7th Legion, the Bat Legion, but there was gossip about strange elements being mixed into it, making it a mess. While undesirable, he would have to accept such an outcome if it came to that. What else could be done? Unexpectedly, the gene seeds that Governor Gu Hang presented were indeed the unadulterated Phoenix seeds. No matter how or from what angle they were scrutinized, they were undeniably pure Phoenix seeds. Maddens wasn't sure whether to be happy or not. If you look at it from a negative perspective, wasn't it wonderful that the lineage of his battle group could be kept pure and intact? But on the positive side, the source of Mr. Gu's seeds remained a thorn in his side. He had been trying to convince himself that all of this was a blessing from the Emperor, a divine grace. Yet, he couldn't help but wonder, why had the Emperor chosen such a person? As for the less permissible thoughts, to be honest, they had crossed his mind, but he felt they were impossible. Corruption by chaos? Impossible. How could pure Phoenix gene seeds contain the taint of chaos? Absolutely not. With all sorts of strange thoughts swirling in his head, Maddens and the others, following Priest Rizzo, met with 3 youngsters who had just completed the gene seed implant surgery and were now laying in their hospital beds. Upon seeing them, Maddens almost instantly cast aside all the thoughts, appropriate and inappropriate, that had occupied his mind. All he had left was the hope that they would grow up healthy. He could sense a resonance within their shared bloodline as it flowed through different bodies. He sincerely hoped the battle group would grow stronger and reclaim its former glory. Phoenix's Death Throes, Stage 3. The Phoenix battle group has now sworn fealty to you through open acknowledgement or through cunning schemes. They have pledged to become your private military force. But this is just the beginning. To build a standard starfighter battle group and achieve the rebirth and revival of the Phoenix requires even more effort from you. Gene Seed, you can exchange 100 favor points for 1 gene seed. Starfighter Technology Tree, you can select this option to restrict the outcome of a technology development to technologies related to starfighters. Note that the success rate and tier of the technology pool are not affected by this choice. Unlock Starfighter Training, you can spend favor points to train a starfighter to a higher level. Veteran level requires 200 favor points, Sergeant Major needs 300 favor points, Squad Champion takes 400 favor points. Growth Acceleration, you can spend 100 favor points to accelerate the growth of superhuman organs, completing the process within a month. The above were the recent developments in the Phoenix's Death Throes event line that remained present in his system interface after the Phoenix battle group had sworn loyalty to Gu Hang. Chapter 318. This is hardly just an event anymore, it's like opening a whole new series of functions related to starfighters. The technology related to starfighters largely determines the level of equipment, while the training of starfighters, like the Army badge system, has many more training options. Of course, it costs many times more. There's even something like growth acceleration. If there were no other concerns, Gu Hang might really have used growth acceleration to speed up those 3 lads in one go, and get them in shape in a month. But after some thought, Gu Hang still refrained from doing so. There was no urgent need for a large number of starfighters at the moment, so he decided to let them grow slowly, and there was no need to stimulate poor Maddens anymore. He had been through a lot of shocks recently, so it would be best to let him calm down first. The all-out oath of allegiance from Phoenix had brought about more than just a change in the event. Within the army badge system, Gu Heng could now see a special entry for Phoenix Battle Group. Upon clicking, he could view the details. Phoenix Battle Group, Special, not upgradable. Number, 394. Starfighters, 4. Starfighter New Blood, 3. Battle Group Servants, 387. Battle Group Arsenal, Slight. The numbers 4 and 3 were straightforward. The 387 battle group servants were likely the individuals found by Phoenix when they were authorized by Gu Heng to search and select young people on Rage Owl Star. These nearly 400 individuals almost certainly could not become starfighters. Nonetheless, they were still considered assets of the Phoenix battle group, becoming battle group servants. They would subsequently take on a range of tasks such as maintaining battle group logistics, armors, weapons, cooking, cleaning, and even taking up arms to fight alongside the starfighters when necessary. However, such situations were not what Gu Heng wanted to see in the long term. In the future, his ideal vision for starfighters was for the Phoenix to only care for their own personnel and their own equipment. As for the rest, whether it be mortal troops or the battle group fleet, they can forget about it. It's not that he didn't have them, but even if he did, Gu Heng certainly wouldn't include those assets within the Phoenix battle group's order of battle. The battle group leader should be concerned with the affairs of the starfighters only. If needed, the Planet Navy, Planet Army will provide unconditional support, but only with Gu Heng's authorization. Even the action of the starfighters themselves must be authorized by Gu Heng. The traditional battle group expecting to become an independent warlord in the Star Sea is impossible. Training starfighters for Gu Heng is, to put it plainly, about nurturing elite enforcers, top-level battle forces designed to deliver decisive blows on the battlefield, not raising a bunch of grandees or a group inclined towards secession and independence. Gu Heng nearly decided to eliminate all mortal troop configurations within the battle groups. Need a flyer? Need air support? The Allied Air Force at your service. Need orbital bombardment? The future fleet at your service. Need heavy vehicles for joint attacks? The Alliance Army Armored Corps at your service. Need logistical and supply support? The Alliance Military and Political Department, Equipment and Logistics Department at your service. Anyway, in Gu Heng's planning, Phoenix is meant to be a hub for super soldiers, not an independent warlord. Everything else that a battle group should have, Gu Heng will provide but in a different way. Maddens could command the Alliance Army granted to him by authorization, but such authorization was one time only, limited to that specific mission and did not alter affiliation. Only if items like Rand assault boats and Rhino troop transporters, considered to be specialized starfighter equipment, were developed would Gu Heng consider directly equipping the starfighters with them. After thinking it over, I realized it was a bit confusing and made changes. Chapter 319. There has been a correction to the last chapter. The arrangement in the last paragraph was indeed a bit inappropriate. The comments weren't deleted, but after the content was changed, all the comments were swallowed. Another month passed, and Gu Heng had invested all of this month's grace points into the construction of the Interstellar Warriors. This time, out of the selected 200 people, 5 new bloods were created for the battle group. Seeing this, the Interstellar Warriors of the Phoenix no longer complained about the governor at all. With 8 new bloods awaiting growth, there would be more of them by the time they grew up than when they had first landed. The brother-in-arms who used to mutter about why it wasn't so smooth before, now had changed his tune to, "Why didn't we swear fealty to the governor when we landed? That way we would not have wasted the 3 gene seeds left by Schneider. What a waste of half a year's time, if only we had cooperated from the start, our new blood might already be able to don power armor and fight alongside us." Gu Heng, however, could not hear the Interstellar Warriors' private conversations. Of course, even if he did know, it wouldn't concern him too much. Right now, he was just feeling pained. Building the Phoenix Battle Group was an investment in the future for Gu Heng. Like this time, with an investment of over 1,400 grace points, Gu Heng acquired 3 Interstellar Warrior new bloods. But for them to be truly useful, it would be at least half a year later. Even after the implantation of the gene seeds and the growth of superhuman organs, time was needed. In other words, in 2 months, after having dumped more than 3,000 grace points, indeed he got 8 more Interstellar Warriors, but it would take at least half a year to a year for them to become effective. To be honest, it was a little painful. But that's how things are, always needing time to grow. The earlier you invest, the sooner you enjoy the benefits, and if you postpone, the maturity of the interstellar warriors is delayed. Moreover, the 3,000 grace points spent in these 2 months didn't just bring 8 temporarily unusable battle group new bloods, it also brought over 300 elite special forces soldiers. Although on the younger side, their combat strength was no less formidable. Building the Special Combat Brigade was also his duty, and they were available for immediate deployment. Since Hu Ke had already calculated the location of the spiritualized gas field discovered by the Nature Salvation Society, it was certainly something that needed to be dealt with. They didn't act last month because the battle in the Viking Valley region was in full swing and the Air Force couldn't be spared. Additionally, the Central Group Army's main forces were positioned towards the more northern areas. If a Special Forces team were to be dispatched for operations at the southernmost tip of the Green Valley subcontinent, and something happened, receiving support would be difficult. But now, the situation has become much clearer. The Central Group Army has almost annihilated the last sizable gathering of aberrant beasts in the Viking Valley region, numbering 500,000. Then, following the main thoroughfares of the Green Valley region, they charged southward, liberating many settlements and carrying out population migrations. In the South Green Valley region, the Alliance forces didn't delve into the jungles, but simply liberated numerous plantations and settlements along their way. In 1 month's time, they nearly completed the migration of around 3 million people. It was a heroic achievement. Relocating the scattered population of the South Green Valley region to the north in such a short time was not an easy task. Despite the migration of 3 million people, the current population under Alliance control in the entire Green Valley region was only about 7 million or so. According to the Alliance's last census of the global population, the Green Valley region was supposed to have a total population of 12 million. Even though this census data is quite old, dating back to the era of the second governor, it's the last valid set of statistics. Based on this data, there should still be about 5 million people scattered across South Green Valley. Of course, in reality, this is unrealistic. Given the current state of the southern Green Lake region, it's very difficult for humans to survive once they're away from major population centers. They face threats from aberrant beasts and also struggle to find a stable source of food. Of course, it's normal that some small, hidden settlements haven't been discovered by the Central Group Army. But it's unlikely that the sum of survivors in those places would amount to 5 million. From this perspective, from the era of the second governor to now, especially since the recent catastrophic surge of aberrant beasts, the total population loss in the Green Valley region is likely in the millions. Secondary are those killed by aberrant beasts, but more probably perished in the chaos and famine that ensued. It's truly heartbreaking. The Central Group Army's operations in the South Green Valley region this past month couldn't possibly have relocated all the population. The remaining hidden settlements, refugees in the midst of escaping, or others scattered for various reasons, the army simply didn't have the time to systematically search every patch of land. They could only erect many signboards in the more conspicuous places, with simple writing explaining Alliance policies and directing them to flee north. To accommodate those who couldn't read, the signs were also illustrated with simple drawings. Chapter 320. Along the way, there will be some Allied supply stations, patrol stations, and the like. In the future, some militias or patrol squads will be stationed there to help those who might still have survived. Gu Hang hoped that by doing this, a greater number of people could be saved and brought back to the north. During this period, the Central Group Army, aside from its own duties, also dispatched a team that kept advancing southward. This team was the distinguished 1st Seaswind Brigade. Their goal pointed towards the southern tip of the continent, advancing towards the direction of the spiritualized gas field as calculated by Hu Ke. Of course, their speed was not especially rapid, as Gu Hang did not wish to startle the enemy prematurely. Currently, the 1st Brigade's position was still over 100 kilometers from the southern tip of the continent. This could be considered as treading on a rather sensitive boundary. Meanwhile, more than 40 Wind Falcon rapid attack vessels had also departed from the airstrip in Revival City. They were over 4,000 kilometers away from their target location. But with the speed of the Wind Falcons, it would take them less than 4 hours to arrive. At the same time, Gu Hang had already established contact with the Claw Fierce Tiger up in the sky. After discussing with Colonel Yelazia for a while, they confirmed that the escort ship stationed in orbit above Anger Extinguishing Star could provide orbital strike support. The Claw Fierce Tiger would soon be ready for support, as long as Gu Xing provided the coordinates, the corresponding strike would fall. Although the firepower of the Claw-Fierce Tiger was no match for that of the quintet, when it came to the instantaneous delivery of firepower, Gu Heng's land forces were still incomparable to a proper starship. As long as the coordinates were precise, a single round of fire from the Claw-Fierce Tiger could destroy all ground targets. In fact, the 40-some Wind Falcon fighters that had set out earlier were meant to verify the coordinates calculated by Hu Ke to ensure their accuracy and to check for any special movement the enemy may have conducted in the meantime. Gu Heng, waiting in the command center at Revival City, finally received a report from the frontline pilots after around 3 or 4 hours. Indeed, they had found a sizable offshore structure near the coordinates calculated by Hu Ke. Actually, they had arrived above the target location half an hour earlier but had taken some time to search the surrounding waters to find it. After all, Hu Ke's calculated position would not be completely accurate, and a manual on-site correction was necessary. Gu Heng thought for a moment and decided not to request an orbital strike directly. Orbital strikes were incredibly expensive, and though Gu Heng would not be the one paying for it, if the results of the requested orbital strike were lackluster, it would be quite difficult for him to justify to Colonel Yelazia. Subsequent requests for orbital support might face a lot of red tape. Gu Heng did not particularly want that to happen, so despite knowing the risks, he still ordered the Wind Falcon fighters to lower their altitude to scout and confirm whether the suspected spiritualized gas field offshore extraction facility was indeed the target they intended to hit. If it turned out to be a blunder and the location was merely a relic from before the war, that would be problematic. The Wind Falcon rapid attack vessels thousands of meters in the high skies, of course, could not all descend. In a previous action, the Wind Falcon fighters' central systems were seized by the enemy, a lesson that made the Allied Air Force wiser. When the pilot's skills were not sufficient to independently control the Wind Falcons, they had to diligently avoid such situations from recurring. Under this premise, maintaining distance was the best approach. Actually, only 3 Wind Falcons decreased their altitude. The rest of the fighters continued to circle high in the sky, closely monitoring below, ready to immediately open fire and carry out a strike to save their comrades at the first sign of trouble. However, during the descent of those 3 fighters, they encountered no danger. The offshore structure that looked rusted and battered was calm and tranquil. It was as if it were indeed a relic from before the war. But they still did not relax their vigilance. Following quickly, 3 fighters landed on the sea structure, in a relatively flat area. The hatch opened, and half the Special Warfare team walked out. The 3 fighters carried a total of 45 Special Forces elites, each wearing exoskeleton armor, complete with tactical helmets, and all at least T3, many of them T2 level elite soldiers. On a battlefield with equal weapon levels, facing a regular army, each of them was confident of scoring dozens of kills in a single combat. According to orders, they were to conduct a detailed search of the structures and maintain constant contact with headquarters. Their individual communication equipment, of course, was not enough to contact headquarters 4,000 kilometers away, but it was enough if they could reach the Wind Falcon fighters in the sky. The supreme commander of this operation was at this moment on one of the fighters high above. That was Maddens. Commander Maddens was out on a mission again, and his 4 battle brothers were also here. However, they did not have to directly engage in combat on the front lines this time, or rather, they did not need to go up immediately. Whether they would go up at all was up to him. The 40-some Wind Falcon fighters from the Allied Air Force's 1st Air Squadron and the more than 200 soldiers from the 10th Special Brigade were all under his direct command. Currently, it looked indeed like just an ordinary pre-war sea structure ruin, perhaps a former offshore mining platform? Whatever its former function, it was likely now obsolete. At least so far, they had not found any signs of abnormalities. However, just as he was thinking this, something unexpected happened below. Fierce gunfire suddenly erupted from all around, and various biotech monsters sprang forth, launching a fierce attack on the 3 fighters that had not yet finished unloading soldiers, which had no time to ascend, and the Special Forces soldiers who were disembarking. Madden's expression was grave. The enemy obviously had some kind of biological hiding technology. Their recent low-altitude scan had also failed to detect any trace of the enemy's concealment. Clearly, the enemy had initially intended to hide and create the illusion that no one was present, but once the ground troops landed, they knew they could no longer stay hidden, so they simply bared their fangs. For the soldiers who landed and those 3 Wind Falcon fighters, it was a perilous situation. But in the grand scheme of things, it was not a major problem. Even if all 3 aircraft were lost and all 45 soldiers died, it would not hinder their correct determination that this was indeed an important enemy base. If he considered the situation with cold-blooded thinking and based on past battle experiences, he might abandon those soldiers and aircraft below, simply transmit the information back, and call for an orbital strike to finish it. However, now she might need to change her way of thinking. He could not treat the mortal troops below as just allies, as mere cannon fodder for the Star Realm army as in past battles. Now, they were all part of the same alliance under the Rage Owl Star. Besides, those soldiers were elites, and many were close to joining the Phoenix and becoming new blood. He could not be too wasteful of these soldiers' lives. Not to mention there were 3 Wind Falcon fighters. He knew that the Lord Governor, despite the rapid expansion of power, overall still did not have a substantial foundation. Losing 3 fighters would indeed be painful for the Lord Governor. Thus, he issued the order for support. The Wind Falcon rapid attack vessels still in the sky, following orders, launched a volley of missiles, appropriately lowered their altitude, and fired rapid bursts with their cannons toward the besieged allies. However, their support did not have much of an effect. When the firepower rained down, a huge light screen enveloped the entire sea structure platform. A void shield. Chapter 321. When a light curtain appeared around the sea platform, blocking all aerial attacks from the fighter jets, Maddens was momentarily shocked. However, he soon realized that it was not a void shield. Although somewhat similar, it was far from reaching the level of a void shield and seemed to be merely a simple energy barrier. The difference between the two was significant. A void shield fundamentally doesn't directly withstand attacks, but rather creates a spatial discrepancy, forming a thin film that envelopes the protected target. When an attack arrives, most types of shells, missiles, or energy rays, upon contacting this film, would get displaced by the misaligned space to another dimension, leaving the protected target unscathed. The defensive efficacy of a void shield was far superior to that of a conventional energy barrier. A successful defense would leave the protected target unaffected. But there were disadvantages, too. Void shield generators were bulky and couldn't be miniaturized, they consumed a lot of power, they were expensive, they couldn't recognize and displace slow-moving targets, and if they were subjected to too much firepower in a short period, causing an overload, they might let some attacks through. However, compared to traditional energy shields, these issues weren't major, as many disadvantages were common to both. For instance, to achieve the same protective effect, conventional energy barriers would consume even more power, they also couldn't stop slow-moving targets. In the case of an overload, instead of letting attacks through, they would be shattered entirely, rendering them useless against any further attacks, with the possibility of the energy shield generator even exploding internally. In comparison, the only advantages of energy barriers were their ability to be miniaturized and their affordability. Maddens, a veteran of countless battles and wide experience, was able to deduce further information after determining that this was not a void shield. The shield generator seemed rather average, not high-tech. But, behind it appeared to be an enormous energy reserve. Unless they could obliterate the firepower threshold it could withstand in one go, the task of overloading it through frequent attacks would be extremely difficult. Was there an opportunity? Maddens ordered the entire fighter squadron to execute another full-force strike, and during this process, he carefully observed the energy shield's reactions. His final judgment was: it's no use. The firepower required to overload the shield generator and to directly destroy it were 2 grades apart. Even accounting for the escort ship in planetary orbit, they might reach the former's requirements, but not the latter's. With the quintet, it would definitely be no problem. Not to mention, just one blast from the Wrath of Loyalty, an L-grade colossal cannon, could obliterate this shield generator. No matter how much energy was behind it, it would be futile. But they didn't have it at the moment, did they? The 20S grade specification weapons on the escort ship, even if fired simultaneously, wouldn't be able to completely destroy the current shield generator. And with a nearly infinite energy source backing it, the shield could quickly recover before the next barrage arrived. In other words, the idea of destroying this sea platform with long-range fire was no longer realistic. At least not until that shield generator was taken down. So, we need to launch a small-scale assault, breach the shield generator, retreat, and then call in long-range fire to destroy the sea platform. I'm familiar with this. Maddens smiled briefly, but then his expression turned solemn again. He was indeed familiar, as space soldiers had performed such tasks too many times. In his 200 years of combat experience, he had carried out similar missions countless times, and he knew the process and the key points inside out. Now faced with a similar task, he felt a sense of familiarity and scoffed at himself. But no matter how many times he had done this type of mission or how rich his experience was, it couldn't hide the enormous danger associated with such tasks. The greatest danger came from the unknown intelligence. What exactly was in that building beneath them, the strength of the enemy, the exact location of their target to destroy, they had no clue about any of these things. Under such circumstances, they actually shouldn't go in. Even an entire team of space warriors could potentially be overturned, as no one knew what kind of monstrosities they might encounter below. Thinking rationally, they could opt to retreat this time and wait for more detailed intelligence later. Maddens had been granted extensive authority, and he could make a decision on this matter with a single word. But he did not choose to do so. His decision stemmed from three main considerations. Firstly, he did not want to mark his first official mission as the total commander for the Alliance with a failed operation. Of course, he gave this factor less thought, just a slight consideration. Fundamentally, he was still a warrior, and political considerations weren't his primary concern. Secondly, he was doubtful that if they retreated this time, how would they gather more intelligence later? This sea platform, whether they wanted to infiltrate or send someone inside as an inside man, conducting intelligence would be very difficult. And they didn't have much time to spend several months on intelligence gathering. Who knew when the cult's plans might come to fruition? Chapter 322. Yet, apart from these external factors, there was a core reason that drove him to deploy more forces, and that was, the enemy didn't seem strong enough. Or rather, the soldiers of the Governor's Special Warfare Brigade were simply too strong. With all aerospace fire support blocked by the energy shield, they were essentially fighting alone, yet they stood their ground. Initially, they did lose over a dozen warriors upon the sudden attack, but their counter-attack was quite sharp. Not only did they kill many lizard-like creatures that emerged from the surroundings with their laser guns, but they also took advantage of this opportunity to quickly exit their hatch and used the Wind Falcon's enormous body as a shield, constructing a defensive front in A formation. As the situation stabilized slightly, the enemy became somewhat anxious. Some biochemical shells were launched, and their corrosive effects even damaged the surface of the grounded Wind Falcon. But at that moment, the Special Force warriors quickly responded. They pulled out several rocket launchers and fired towards the direction of the incoming biochemical shells. The rockets, with their trailing flames, had a formidable effect, at least temporarily preventing any new biochemical shells from coming in. Later, they even spontaneously organized a combat team of 5 and, under the cover of their comrades, launched an assault inside a building, aiming to clear out the enemies and establish a secondary defensive position to expand their survival space. If these Special Warfare Squad members on the ground could create such a favorable situation, then what reason did Maddens, as the commander, have to forsake them? In his channel, there was also a clamor for battle from the soldiers of the 10th Brigade. Among them, that individual known as Lacroix, the Mortal Kombat hero, was particularly eager to join the fight as part of the second wave, to provide ground support for the combat and to rescue and cover his comrades so they could withdraw. Maddens let a hint of a smile touch his lips. "I'll allow you to go down, but your objective isn't solely to cover your comrades. I want you to clear out the 6 indoor buildings surrounding the landing site, creating an opportunity for our subsequent forces to land." Upon hearing this request, Lacroix was startled at first but then responded resolutely, guaranteed to complete the mission. Subsequently, a formation of 3 craft rapidly descended in altitude. The leader was none other than the ace pilot of the Allied Air Force, Lieutenant Cookie. He and his wingman, carrying more than 40 special warfare elite including Lacroix, approached the energy shield after descending to a certain altitude. This was the most hazardous phase. Being too fast was unacceptable. The energy shield was only about 80 meters above the ground, and if they were too fast, they would be repelled. Moreover, a high speed would not allow enough time to decelerate for the landing within the 80-meter height, leading to a disastrous crash. But it was at this time that the enemy's anti-air firepower showed its strength. It appeared the enemy had set up anti-aircraft guns, and there were biochemical shells being fired into the sky as well. With a slower speed, naturally, the enemy's hit rate increased substantially. Fortunately, the Wind Falcon was not a fragile aircraft but a rapid assault craft, cloaked in sturdy armor that offered protection slightly better than that of an armored vehicle. Bravely facing the enemy's anti-air fire, they successfully penetrated the energy shield's barrier. Once inside the energy shield, they did not hold back against those enemies. Outside the energy shield, they couldn't hit them, but once inside, they could confidently release their firepower. The 3 Wind Falcons, while descending, unleashed the 6 air-to-ground missiles they carried, engulfing the enemy in a sea of flames. Soon after, their autocannons began to roar, sweeping in all directions, not only attacking the enemy's anti-aircraft firepower to silence it but also providing some fire support and assistance to the special warfare elites who were still fighting on the ground. With the enemy's fire suppressed to a degree, the 3 Wind Falcons could take this opportunity to start their ascent. However, one of them seemed to have a problem and couldn't fly up anymore. But the other 2 that successfully took off launched all their mounted missiles before they left the 80-meter height of the energy shield. At this moment, the 3 newly arrived Wind Falcons had already begun offloading troops. Actually, they hadn't yet touched down, hovering about 10 meters above the ground. But at this height, as soon as the hatch opened, the Special Forces elite began to jump out one after another. They didn't even bother with rappelling, just jumped straight down. To the average person, a fall from 10+ meters could be fatal, but for the elite warriors led by Lacroix, it was an acceptable drop. Soldiers of level T3 and above were already at, or even slightly beyond the physical limits of humankind, not to mention they were equipped with exoskeleton suits that could buffer their landing. Lieutenant Cookie, who had guts to match his skills, once he had dropped off the troops in the cabin, didn't leave like the other aircraft. Instead, he chose to maneuver at a low altitude of 80 meters, assisting the ground forces with his autocannon, providing crucial heavy firepower support. In the confined space, he piloted the Wind Falcon, dodging and weaving. Although he couldn't get up to speed, afraid of crashing into something, he pushed the Wind Falcon's agility to the limit. The unpredictable flight trajectory was exactly how he avoided many attacks while also managing to launch bursts of cannon fire at the ground below, achieving some combat results. With the precious air support, Lacroix's team successfully landed and regrouped with the elite forces on the ground, beginning the task of clearing out the 6 buildings surrounding the landing area, as previously assigned by Maddens. This sea platform was an irregular rectangle, roughly 2 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide. In the center, at its core, stood a conical tower about 30 meters tall, narrower at the top than at the bottom, surrounded by densely packed buildings, mostly circular storages or towers interconnected by a network of pipes. A significant portion of the platform stretched below sea level. It was faintly visible that a considerable part of the central and largest conical tower extended underwater. Giant columns and pipes upheld the bottom of the platform, anchored from the seafloor, supporting the entire structure. The landing area chosen by the Allied Special Forces was near the southern edge, where the ground seemed relatively larger and flatter, suitable for the Wind Falcons to land. Once Lacroix had cleared the 6 buildings around the landing area, the pressure on the site was greatly reduced. Soon after, the third wave, also comprising 3 Wind Falcons carrying more than 40 elite warriors, descended. This time, they had also cleared to the south, effectively dealing with enemies from one side. Following that, Lacroix personally led the team towards the central hub of the almost town-sized sea platform, advancing, and establishing defensive positions along the way with 2 or 3 soldiers guarding key points. They quickly breached the central spire, clearing the enemies inside. There, they made 2 significant discoveries. Firstly, they found a route leading down from the central spire. The iron door was tightly shut, not easy to enter, but under a thermite bomb, it would be no different than paper. Secondly, when they opened several storage containers on the sea platform, they witnessed a scene that would haunt them forever. They had expected the container-like storage might hold a variety of things. But they could never have imagined that they were filled with people. Crowded together, densely packed, the dead yet still living. The soldiers who opened the storage containers from above saw countless eyes looking up at them, faces and bodies covered in festering sores, crammed together, almost floating in pus. They were still alive, still squirming, an abominable power sustaining their existence. Conscious and enduring endless agony. Itching, excruciating pain, maggots crawling all over, a despair of wanting death but not finding it seemed almost tangible. As soon as the storage doors were opened, along with the thick stench, a kind of spiritual energy was formed. The Special Forces warrior who opened the door, even though wearing a fully covered tactical helmet with some protection against toxins, still felt he smelled the terrible odor. The despair and suffering invaded along with the smell, causing dizziness and vertigo. If it weren't for the help of a comrade, he might have fallen from above. Sorry, the update today is a bit late. Beginning the journey on a business trip. Chapter 323. All who had seen the sight within the living cans could not endure the psychological shock. Even if one ignored the soul assault rising under the influence of dark magic, just witnessing that scene alone, anyone with the slightest bit of empathy would feel discomfort. Specific intelligence had already been reported up the chain. Upon receiving the message, Maddens didn't say much on the communication channel, just remarked, "The fourth reinforcement will arrive soon." The so-called fourth reinforcement meant Maddens was leading the team himself. After sending down 3 batches of people, these brave mortal warriors had not only stabilized the situation at the landing field but had also pierced through the entire cluster of buildings on the sea level, creating a direct route to the core building. They had established several defensive nodes along the way, and the monsters lurking in various other areas, as well as the cult followers, had no way to cut off this path. With such a situation at hand, what was there to hesitate about? To be honest, Maddens even felt a bit ashamed, like he was stealing the glory of victory. During the Atonement expedition in the past, when had they fought such a battle? Those Imperial commanders didn't treat the Star Warriors of the Atonement expedition like people, just airdropping them into enemy clusters and that's it. Even after the mission was completed and it was time to retreat, they had to carve out a bloody path themselves, then clear the enemies at the evacuation point and ensure safety before the allies responsible for their retreat would descend. And now? The Alliance's special forces at the landing field cleared it for you, the route to the target was open, your escape corridor was guarded, and the evacuation aircraft circled in the sky, ready to be summoned on command. At one point, Maddens even considered ordering Lacroix to lead his team straight into the central tower sealed downward gate and solve the problem himself. When reporting back, he wouldn't discredit the warriors' efforts, all the glory would belong to them. However, he ultimately chose not to do so. Achievements were secondary. Who knew what lay beneath the central tower? Encountering some difficult demon or god was one concern. Even if it could be dealt with, Maddens was not pleased with the idea of more casualties. He knew that his Lord Governor had also put a lot of effort into this special operations team. Moreover, the likelihood of such a possibility had significantly increased when those below discovered the despair-filled living cans. After landing, he and Priest Rizzo went to take a look at the opened can warehouse. With their mental willpower, such a trifle wasn't much. Even if there was a spiritual assault from the dark magic, neither of them so much as twitched an eyebrow. Their superhuman mental willpower wasn't something that could be affected by a bit of spillover dark magic. As for the psychological impact of the scene itself, it wasn't that the Star Warriors lacked empathy, but they were widely experienced and somewhat numb. In the fight against the Chaos Cult, they had seen too many gruesome things, many atrocities that pushed boundaries. This was just one more incident on the list. They were still able to analyze the situation with a calm attitude. "This is chaotic sorcery," Priest Rizzo provided a definite answer, "our previous speculations weren't wrong." Then, he lifted the holy emblem hanging at his waist, closed his eyes, and began to recite prayers silently. It was miraculous, as he started to recite, the surrounding special operations soldiers all felt the previously faint and nauseating sense of spiritual assault dissipate considerably. When the prayer finished, that feeling was gone altogether. At the same time, the wailing noises inside the kin warehouse gradually subsided. Then someone brave enough took another look. "All the people are dead," said the soldier looking back. Rizzo opened his eyes and explained, "They should have died long ago. The Chaos Cult tormented them and placed them here, using dark magic to forcibly sustain their lives, in order to amplify and absorb their agony of wishing for death but unable to achieve it, achieving their evil goals. I merely prayed to the Emperor, dispelling the dark magic. Free from its influence, these people could finally be liberated and rest in peace." All those around instantly accepted Priest Rizzo's explanation. It matched the reality they had seen. The people in those cans indeed had no hope, trapped in an insufferable state. Death was not a horror but a release for them. After giving a brief explanation, Rizzo then said to Maddens, "We might be in trouble. If all of these," he gestured around at the numerous kin warehouses of all sizes, "are the same, then so much despair, fermenting, combined with the intelligence indicating that there's a spiritualized gas field below with ample spiritual energy, we can't estimate what might be waiting for us behind that door." He gave a serious warning to Maddens. And of course, Maddens wouldn't ignore the warning from the priest with 400 years of combat experience. He thought it over carefully and decided to act nonetheless. "We cannot shrink back because of an unknown enemy. I know, I'm just reminding you to be careful." At this point, Priest Rizzo paused for a moment, then couldn't help but add, "The battle group's new blood still needs your leadership." Chapter 324. Hearing about the new blood, Madden's heart softened a bit. But immediately, he returned to his role as a battle commander. He turned his head and said to Lacroix, "Sergeant Major, I need you to take some men to prepare for the demolition. Next, we will act together." "Yes, sir." At the bottom of the maritime ruins, at the very bottom of the central spire, there were 3 core facilities established by the Nature Salvation Society. The first was a spirit energy field refinery. The second was a shield generator. Both devices, originating from the pre-war era, had been discarded as obsolete. Under Ge Wajia's technical capabilities, and under the twisting reality of chaotic sorcery, they had been repaired, put back into operation, and had even formed a connection with each other. The pure spiritual energy extracted from the spiritualized gas field was poured into the shield generator, providing it with an almost endless source of energy. Beyond these 2, there was also a demon engine. The so-called demon engine referred to an abyssal demon that had fused its mental will with a certain machine, gaining a physical entity in the real world, enabling it to act. That monstrosity, like a moldy, flesh-grown machine, stood quietly not far from the shield generator. Ge Wajia was also here. At this moment, he sat opposite the demon engine with his eyes tightly closed. The voice of the demon kept echoing within Ge Wajia's soul. "Accept the gift, fully accept the gift. Only the benevolent Father can save this world, he will grant immortality to all life on the planet. The followers of the false emperor are closing in, do you really want to let this world return to the cruel hands of that empire?" These voices kept tempting Ge Wajia's soul. Meanwhile, another faint voice echoed from the bottom of his heart. "Don't believe it. Think about those people stuffed into the canisters, can that be called immortality, can that be called living? Turn back, let's put an end to all of this." Listening to the voices pulling at his mind simultaneously, Ge Wajia himself slowly opened his mouth. "I said, if you keep nagging, I'll sacrifice you." Both voices suddenly fell silent. After a while, that voice from the depth of his heart spoke up again, "Would you rather believe these demons that once destroyed our world than the Empire? It was the Empire that destroyed our world." This was Ge Wajia's belief. He had no intention of arguing further. He raised his hands, making an offering gesture. And at that moment, the previously silent voice of the demon stirred once more. That strange laughter, reverberating in his heart and infiltrating the depths, was elated, like a hunter who had finally captured his long-desired prey, eagerly opening his fangs, ready to devour it. At this moment, the voice within Ge Wajia's heart had become incredibly weak and faint. He left one last message: trust in humanity. Ge Wajia also gave his final response: "I trust in the benevolent Father." Ha ha ha. The demon's strange, heavy laughter continued to echo in the depth of his heart, completely occupying the deepest recesses. "Yes. Exactly. Trust in the benevolent Father. Only the benevolent Father is the ultimate destination for everything in the universe." With the demon's laughter echoing, what Ge Wajia could hear ringing near his ears, the so-called gospel from heaven, grew louder and louder. His body began to undergo violent changes, sprouting numerous tumors. These tumors kept expanding, then burst and oozed pus, only to be immediately replaced by larger ones growing from within. During this process, his size kept increasing, becoming more and more contorted. Eventually, he became a creature nearly 6 meters tall with 3 horns on his head and 3 eyes, almost touching the ceiling. His body developed horizontally into a bloated, yellow-green figure riddled with pus-filled sores, then abruptly, his swollen belly pop exploded, spilling a mass of plasma and revealing the intestines inside. But he was completely oblivious, his massive face simply bearing a fierce smile. "I am Ge Wajia. I am, the Great Unclean." 2 different voices echoed from his mouth, filling the entire space. Madans, Rizzo, and Lacroix, upon entering this space, were met with this sight. A huge, foul-smelling creature stood before them, occupying a large part of the already spacious 6-meter-tall area. After blowing the door open, they encountered some obstructions during their descent. Among the enemies, numerous demons appeared. Real demons. A type of monster called the Plague Bearer, with a distorted humanoid shape, 3 eyes and 3 horns, as if a weakened, miniaturized version of the Great Unclean. These Plague Bearers, along with some plague spirits, formed a demonic group, and together with the cult followers, tormented by the plague into inhuman forms but still alive, they barred the human troops' assault. The firearms in the hands of those cult followers looked like ordinary kinetic rifles produced locally, but when fired, the bullets had a special spiritual energy effect, significantly increasing their destructive power. The plague bearers were even more terrifying, spitting out saliva like bullets, containing intense poison and corrosive effects. For ordinary special ops elites, the ceramic steel cladding on the exoskeleton provided limited protection, corroding holes in a second or two, followed by the rapid death of the soldier inside. Even the space warriors were reluctant to expose their Terminator power armor to such loathsome attacks. Even if it wouldn't be penetrated that easily, they didn't want their precious armor pitted and pocked. Logically, after encountering resistance in their advance, they shouldn't be too hasty. Since the enemy clearly had no way to retreat and was not worried about fleeing, they just needed to utilize the terrain, take cover, and gradually push forward, using heavy firepower to clear out enemies step by step. However, during this process, they felt a very unsettling presence emanating from the depths of the building, from even lower levels. Maddens consulted Priest Rizzo's opinion briefly and decided to go for a full-on assault, even if it meant more casualties. They had to speed up their pace, or else, they felt that something significant was happening below. For this reason, Maddens, as the strongest, led the charge. The most up-to-date noves are published on Fruitnoelo. His Terminator power armor was almost the perfect cover in these cramped quarters. With defense a notch above the conventional power armor, it easily withstood incoming fire. Moreover, Maddens wasn't an easy target. Although his mobility was slightly less than that of standard tactical power armor once he donned the Terminator, he could still manage some evasive maneuvers, avoiding the full brunt of incoming fire. And the heavy grenade launcher he held in one hand, like a miniature rapid-fire cannon, mercilessly obliterated all enemies in front of him. The three warriors accompanying him also cleared out enemies swiftly with their grenade launchers, relieving the pressure on the commander. The elite troops behind them were no pushovers either. They couldn't withstand a hit from a plague bearer or a cult gunman, but by overloading their laser rifles, they too could take down an enemy with a single shot. Still, they were a step too late. Facing the fully formed, immense demon ahead, even Maddens in his Terminator power armor felt like a small child in comparison. Moreover, Maddens fully understood what he was seeing. This was, the Great Unclean, a being known as the Great Demon. Why would such an enemy appear on Rage Owl Star? Was there fertile ground here for the advent of a great demon? Today's update is here. Finally found some time to write in the evening. I'm currently on a business trip, and for the next week or so, I will do my best to ensure the daily 4,000-word update is not missed, though I cannot commit to a noon release anymore. Chapter 325. The so-called demons are powerful entities that are neither real nor illusory, not bound by the laws of physics in the material world. Their very existence is a distortion of reality. According to relevant research, demons exist within the chaotic abyss, the dark side of the universe, a pure energy world. Demons can only enter the real universe under specific conditions, such as being summoned in a ritual, or when a rift from the abyss appears somewhere. Even so, they cannot remain in the real universe for long. If they must do so, they need to drag a part of the chaotic abyss into reality, overlaying a part of the real world, creating what is called the demon world. Otherwise, they must be bound to a host, which can be mechanical or a living being. And the Great Demon refers to the strongest among the demons. The demons that bear this title are without exception the most terrifying enemies humanity faces. Depending on their affiliation, the types of great demons that manifest can differ. Very few people have seen a great demon with their own eyes, and the vast majority of those who have are dead. But Maddens and Rizzo are among the very few lucky ones. Their battle group had participated in a battle against the ravages of the plague cult during the penitential expedition. When the Phoenix arrived at that planet, the war had already entered its final phase. Humanity had failed. The mission of the Phoenix battle group was to assist the last Imperial Army troop in withdrawing from the planet. On the battlefield, Maddens saw with his own eyes a creature similar to the one he faced now. It was a plague great demon, classified as the Unclean One. Wielding a rust-stained great sword, it was invincible on the battlefield. Bullets, missiles, laser beams, various types of weapons that bombarded it seemed only to tickle. Even when they did cause damage, it quickly healed back to normal. There were 2 regiments involved in the battle. In addition to their own Phoenix, there was another clad in blue with red cross stripes, known as the Iris Knights Regiment. He witnessed the commander of the Iris Knights, protected by the firepower of several tactical squads, charging towards the Unclean One with his Glory Guard, all in their Terminator power armor. In the duel, the Great Demon's sweeping rust-stained sword effortlessly slaughtered one Glory veteran after another. The brave and fearless commander did not waste the sacrifice of his battle brothers, seizing the opportunity to leap high, his fine-work dynamo sword pierced one of the great demon's eyes. With a mighty pull downwards, it sliced through the other eye and half the head as well. But that was the extent of it. Even though the dynamo sword plunged halfway into the demon's head, and its rust-stained great sword was cut down by two other battle brothers, they ultimately failed to defeat the unclean one. Its other remaining, thick arm grabbed the commander, smashed him to the ground, and with one stomp, crushed him to death. Then, it lowered its head, which had been rapidly healing the split half, and bit into a Terminator veteran. Corrosive saliva made the armor brittle, and with a forceful bite, it was split in two. Incidentally, it picked up the fallen greatsword with its remaining hand and killed another with a swift slash. Maddens watched from a distance as a regimental commander, leading a squad of elite glory guard, all in Terminator power armor, supported by at least 30 tactical squads armed to the teeth with meltaguns, plasma, and heavy explosives, was obliterated by one unclean one. It can't be said that the Iris Knights did not fight valiantly, to the very last man, they did not retreat. But they were completely annihilated by that unclean one and the variety of monsters constantly swarming out from behind it. The Iris Knights were a relatively new regiment, their combat experience still lacking. But what of it? If the Phoenix had gone up to fight in the same situation, would the outcome have been much better? Maddens didn't think so. Neither did the battle group leader of the Phoenix at the time. Back then, there were people in the battle group who wanted to go support the Iris Knights, but their battle group leader vetoed the idea. The Iris Knights could afford to lose a bunch of men and still return to their home planet to recuperate. They were on a penitential expedition and couldn't afford such losses. Carrying out their own mission was what mattered, protecting the retreat of the Allies as much as possible was their duty. Of course, the indifference to their plight left the Iris Knights quite dissatisfied, and they began to harbor resentment towards the Phoenix, souring the relationship between the two regiments. Discover exclusive tales at Empire. But that's another story, not worth mentioning for now. The reason he recalled that time was because the appearance of the unclean one before him had awakened those memories. This creature was almost identical to the one he had seen before. Behind this great demon, on the demon engine, a rift in the abyss about 2 meters long and half a meter wide opened starkly, with 3 or 4 demons jostling at the entrance, eager to emerge. If it really was an unclean one, then they were finished. Everyone present would die. Maddens even felt a shiver of dread. His thoughts drifted far away for a moment. The battle group had just received a new glimmer of hope, with fresh blood in training. What would happen if they died here today? Chapter 326. If they all died here, and the rift to the abyss on the demon engine grew ever larger, eventually forming a tide of demons that swept over the world, what then? Could the new blood of the battle squad escape? Focus, watch closely. Rizzo's reminder pulled Maddens back from his wild thoughts. Find your next adventure on Empire. Rizzo's voice continued, this isn't the one we encountered back then, they're different. This statement helped Maddens regain his senses even more. He observed carefully but found nothing unusual, whether in the spiritual pressure, the appearance, or the suffocating stench, all seemed unchanged. As if sensing Maddens's confusion, Rizzo explained further, the surrounding environment. Maddens had an epiphany. Indeed, as Rizzo said, the presence of demons requires the support of the surrounding environment. The rift to the chaotic abyss did indeed let some of the abyssal atmosphere seep into the real world, but the rift was too small, and it hadn't been open long enough. The extent of the overlay on the real world shouldn't be enough to support the appearance of the most terrifying enemies, like the great unclean ones. Could this one be only for show? But what if this judgment was wrong? No matter the situation, we have to go in, Rizzo said, we have no room to fall back, the abyss rift can be only resolved best now, delaying will only make the problem worse. I understand, Maddens took a deep breath, then quickly began arranging the battle tasks. Wajia. Or rather, the great unclean one temporarily using the name Wajia, had long sensed the humans who had entered the same space. But it didn't care. To it, those insects were inconsequential, the real task was to expand the abyss rift as much as possible in the meantime. It was just a bit slow. Swinging a giant bell, or more accurately, a bronze bell, it produced bursts of sound. Dark magic surged from within, seeking contact with its true form in the abyss. Through its efforts, the abyss rift was finally widened a little. At least, those demons rushing to come forth found it easier now to emerge. But Wajia was still not satisfied. The spiritualized gas field supporting this place was a bit small. The prior despair ritual had not been completed perfectly and had been rushed, resulting in the energy drawn from the spiritualized gas field turning into Chaudakal despair power too slowly. But these were the conditions it had, no choice. As for whether it would be disrupted by those outsiders. The great Wajia had already taken a mortal body to come here. Although the body's original essence wasn't strong and there hadn't been enough time to drag out its abyssal essence from the rift, it still didn't think anything on this planet could threaten it, force it out of the real world. However, when those guys actually charged out, it was taken aback for a moment. Especially the one in the lead, the huge red Terminator power armor, which brought back some unpleasant memories. Once, when conquering and devouring a planet, it had been blinded in both eyes by a group of similar beings in different liveries, had half its head split open, and one hand chopped off. Though it had eventually won, repairing those injuries had taken some time. The fierce human assaults, brimming with courage, caused much more severe damage than any gunfire and were much harder to recover from. It took decades, only recently reaching its peak condition again. Having regained full strength, Wajia had hastily continued to serve its benefactor, taking charge of the invasion of a small world. It so happened that there was a mortal here who had received the benefactor's grace, a suitable bridge. By the present moment, it had thought everything was almost in hand, the entire world was about to fall into its grasp. But it hadn't expected that among the human insects arriving at a critical moment, there would also be an annoying interstellar warrior. And one clad in Terminator power armor, at that. He was not too happy. On one hand, it reminded him of some not too pleasant memories, on the other hand, he also felt a bit nervous. If it had been a normal time, he would have killed those 4 interstellar warriors and the human soldiers following them as if it were nothing. But now, the essence of his power was not yet sufficient here, which actually made him a bit nervous. He did not overestimate himself, withdrawing from his expansion of the Abyss Rift, but rather, he lifted the bronze bell in his hand and with a fierce shake, charged towards the approaching humans. From the numerous pustules and open wounds on his body suddenly emerged a great quantity of monsters. Plague fly swarm. The plague flies, as large as puppies, flew out in great numbers, along with the freshly emerged plague bearers and plague wraiths from the Abyss Rift, launching an assault on the humans. In an instant, red laser beams were in full play. The human soldiers who followed right behind the interstellar warriors fired their weapons with exceptional skill, directing their firepower at the monsters. The Great Unclean One, Wajia, had to admit that, apart from those interstellar warriors, the rest of the human soldiers were no weaklings either. His little darlings had been shot and killed in great numbers in that round of fire. He felt anger, and with a roar, he swung his rust-pocked great sword overhead at the warrior charging at the forefront. The Great Unclean One's swing, seemingly without skill, was merely a powerful chopping strike, but Maddens, who bore the brunt of it, felt as though there was nowhere to hide. He could only roar as he lifted his power sword to meet the strike. According to his past experience, anyone who tried to resist the Great Unclean One's great sword had met their end with a single slash. He could no longer concern himself with what might happen to him, and could only resist with all his might. The rust-pocked great sword came crashing down. But amidst the clang, Maddens actually withstood it. Even though he felt like he was withstanding the heaviest slash he had ever encountered in his life, he did indeed manage to bear it with his firm will and the strong support of his righteous model Terminator power armor. Wajia was full of hatred. Previously, he had been praising the original owner of this body for making the right choice by merging with him, being devoured by him, and allowing him to descend upon this world. Now, he was cursing the frailty of this body, which meant the physical form he had created upon his arrival could muster at most 1% of the strength from his heyday. But what other choice did he have? While he increased the strength of his swing, his other hand furiously rang the bronze bell. With the naked eye, one could see the dark green spiritual energy gathering with the swinging of the bell, seemingly concentrating some terrifying force. Just then, Wajia felt his strength suddenly weaken by a third, and he could not even suppress Maddens anymore. The squad leader seized the opportunity when the pressure suddenly decreased, pushed the great sword away with force, and then raised his other hand to fiercely bombard the Great Unclean One's exposed intestines with a heavy explosive grenade. Pus and foul blood spattered, the struck demon staggered back several steps. He sadly found that even his resistance to damage had greatly diminished. This was not the way to fight. He once again turned his gaze towards the priest standing next to Maddens. The priest held the holy emblem of the pseudo-emperor against his chest, reciting the detestable scripture. This was the culprit weakening his strength. It was dispersing the influence of the abyss, causing the power support Wajia got from the abyss rift to diminish even further. But this priest was clearly not as difficult to deal with as the one clad in Terminator power armor. Wajia malevolently aimed the bronze bell at him, and the power that had not yet finished accumulating, but was already terrifyingly substantial, was directly blasted at him. Chapter 327. The surface of the bell, that thick green light, suddenly shot out. A green sphere, surrounded by what seemed like many mosquitoes and flies, with a long tail trailing behind, flew towards Priest Rizzo. The sphere's flying speed wasn't very fast, and Priest Rizzo attempted to dodge it. However, the thing had a tracking effect and also drew a trajectory in mid-air, following Rizzo closely. Lacroix, who was behind him, noticed this and raised his hand, firing his charged laser gun at the malicious energy sphere with a strange trajectory. It hit the target accurately, but to no avail. The red charged laser was swallowed by the sphere, and the malicious energy within was hardly affected. With no way to avoid it, Rizzo could only raise the scepter in his hand to meet the malicious energy. On the scepter, the gravity field activated, and the holy symbol in his other hand released a fierce golden glow. Then, he slammed it down with his hammer. The ball of malicious energy was actually shattered by the strike. But at the same time, the holy symbol in Rizzo's hand also broke. Wajia let out a hearty laugh. Although he failed to kill that annoying priest with that strike, shattering the holy symbol was crucial. This priest was a bit strange, and the holy symbol in his hand, with its pseudo-imperial power, was even weirder. It could continuously dispel the influence of the chaotic abyss and weaken his power. Now that the holy symbol was shattered, it couldn't dispel the influences anymore. He immediately felt his power rising, recovering. However, he had just laughed twice when his smile faded at once. No doubt the holy symbol was shattered, but his left hand holding the bell also suddenly cracked and then broke into 3 pieces. His bell was a grace given to him by the Father himself. Although what was here was not the actual entity of the Father's artifact, just a projection of a sliver of the power source. But now that it was broken, he had nothing to use. Without the help of this artifact, Wajia's summoning of the power of the chaotic abyss would also be weakened. In the end, he really didn't gain anything and had even suffered a slight loss. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Maddens once again parried his heavy sword strike and came to his front, fiercely cutting a big gash on his arm with the dynamo sword. Behind Maddens and Rizzo, the two main forces, the other 2 battle brothers were also busy. Knowing that merely relying on the firepower of a bomb gun wasn't enough to fight the unclean one, they also carried plasma handguns. The fully charged plasma handgun, with a single shot's power exceeding that of a heavy bomb. Stay tuned with Empire. However, the unclean one, who seemed to rely solely on his exposed skin with no external armor for protection, did not suffer serious harm. He was only punctured with 2 holes, about as thick as a human thigh. The damage seemed considerable, but for a plague great demon known for its robust vitality, 6 meters tall and possibly even wider, such injuries were not serious. Even, under the squirming of flesh, the seemingly terrifying puncture scorch wounds quickly filled back in. Of course, it still hurt, and Wajia's powerful sword strike went askew. Maddens found the opportunity and landed 2 blows on him with the dynamo sword. By nature, dynamo weapons attach a disintegration force field to a powerful metal blade, nearly indestructible. With a single cut, even the formidable body of the unclean one would be sliced open as easily as a hot knife through butter, leaving a large wound. For the unclean one's vitality, such wounds were not fatal. But healing wounds requires energy, and the foul blood and pus that spilled from the reopened wounds represented the loss of power. All of this was making the fearsome great demon weaker. If it weren't for Wajia being very careful to protect himself, not giving Maddens too many chances to directly threaten his arm, things would have been even more troublesome. If he, not at his peak, were to lose an arm as he had in the past, the fight would become far more problematic. But after he regained his rhythm, with one heavy sword and his body's strong resistance to impact, coupled with the plague fly swarm emerging from his body, he managed to keep fighting back and forth with the 4 phoenixes. For a while, neither side could overcome the other. The battle reached a deadlock for the moment. However, Lacroix, standing slightly to the rear, was somewhat anxious inside. In his view, the balance formed by this battle was extremely fragile. The reason was simple: the Star Warriors were consistently lacking a fatal means to take down the Plague Great Demon. The battle seemed intense, with gravity scepters, dynamo swords, plasma weapons, bombs, a barrage raining down on the massive monster's body. But despite the onslaught, the wounds they inflicted could not threaten its life, as those fatal injuries to ordinary people were slowly healing. On the other hand, although the great demon didn't seem to have landed an effective blow yet, it only needed one success. If Maddens or any star warrior were slightly negligent, not guarded, or if the great demon came up with some unexpectedly tricky move, it would be over. One hit from that rusty greatsword, at least 3 meters long, would bypass any power armor, leading to certain death. Even Maddens's Justice model Terminator would probably not withstand it. Chapter 328. Once that situation arose, the balance of battle would have been broken. But what could he do? Together with him, 9 teams of elite special forces soldiers, over 40 people, had infiltrated the underground space along with the interstellar warriors. The others were above, guarding the route of retreat, ready to provide support at any moment. What they could do now was just to use the firepower in their hands to help out a bit, killing off the swarms secreted by the great demon. They hadn't refrained from attempting to use stronger firepower against the great demon to assist the interstellar warriors in their attack. But the effect was minimal. They had brought down 9 rocket launchers, each firing 3 rounds in volleys, but the power was only slightly better than that of a single high-explosive bomb. Madden's volley of high-explosive bombs hardly had any effect, not to mention the rocket launchers that could only fire 1 round at a time. Rather than waste heavy firepower like that, it was better to use it against the ordinary demons. As for the laser rifles they had on hand, they were even weaker. No wonder sometimes the enemies of the Empire would jokingly refer to them as flashlights. Although it was a mockery, when facing the great demon, no matter whether the rifle was charged or not, overloaded or not, a blast of a laser beam was indeed not much different from a flashlight just lighting things up. Moreover, they had to allocate a significant portion of their firepower to the slowly widening abyssal rift. Various types of plague demons were constantly emerging from there, but fortunately, when they arrived, the enemy numbers were not yet substantial, resulting in only a 2 to 3 meter long rift that could be targeted by gunfire, killing each demon as it came out. However, even so, Lacroix also felt there was a hidden danger. As the abyssal rift gradually widened, he noticed that their firepower seemed to be doing less damage to the demons. In fact, this was due to the chaotic abyss's power gradually eroding the real world. Demons are conceptual monsters. When the chaos corruption in a place is too high, not only can demons draw much stronger power from it, but it also causes the rules of the chaotic abyss to replace the physical laws of the real world. Firearms, lasers, and artillery that are founded on physical laws will see their power diminish. Conversely, all close combat methods symbolizing human courage will conform to this rule and won't be affected much. But to ask humans to fight plague demons with their flesh and blood. Of course, Lacroix didn't understand all these notions. He just noticed that a demon that used to be killed with 3 or 4 shots now took 4 or 5. And once the difficulty in killing them increased further, their firepower might no longer ensure that all the demons emerging from the rift could be killed in time. If a few plague carriers or benevolent beasts managed to slip out, tangling up the interstellar warriors for a moment or two, creating a good opportunity for the terrible great demon to attack, then the current balance would crumble instantaneously. Lacroix made up his mind that he had to do something. He began to take action. He first set his sights on that great unclean one, as he still had thermite bombs in his possession. But this time, his action failed. The battle awareness of the plague great demon was still very sharp. It noticed Lacroix's move, identified the high-threat weapon in his hand, and spat a glob of thick phlegm directly at him. If it weren't for the fact that Lacroix, too, had his level raised by Gu Hang, possessing a superhuman physique and reflexes, he would really have been in trouble this time. He deftly dodged and watched as the ground was corroded into a large pit, from which a plague wraith was crawling out. He raised the bomb gun in his hand. His physical condition was sufficient to support the use of a bomb gun, making up for the instantaneous lack of firepower in laser weapons, and after blasting it, he abandoned his original plan at the call of Maddens. Maddens meant that his actions were very dangerous, and even a thermite bomb wouldn't be enough to kill the great demon. A great unclean one was not a beastman overlord. A thermite bomb could at most burn off a small part of its body, also failing to be fatal. But although Lacroix heeded the advice, he still didn't intend to halt his actions. Blasting the great unclean one might not be effective, but it seemed like a viable tactic for other targets. He then shifted his aim to the demon engine positioned behind the great unclean one. That demon engine, drawing supernatural powers from the spiritualized gas field beneath and connected to the abyssal rift above, served as the source of power for the expansion of the chaotic abyss. If it could be destroyed, the battle might be turned around. He led a combat team, circumventing the battlefield from the flank, with the other soldiers providing cover fire to assist in this maneuver. Maddens and the other 3 interstellar warriors also noticed his action. This was a smart move, so they too launched corresponding cooperative moves. Maddens and Rizzo began to attack more fiercely, even somewhat recklessly, mainly to draw Giwajia's attention so as not to let this terrifying creature turn its gaze toward the action squad sneaking up behind the Great Demon. The Great Unclean One was not easily distracted, but it had no choice. Chapter 329. It must be emphasized that he was not at his full strength, possessing merely 1% of his power from his prime. Otherwise, he would have already slaughtered everyone present. After getting involved, he even found it difficult to turn his massive body in such a confined space. If Maddens really went berserk with his power sword, he could stab him dozens of times in a short period, enough to kill him. All he could do was to release more plague fly swarms to harass the action squad while dealing with the interstellar warriors. Moreover, he would occasionally turn his head to spit at the squad. His actions were effective. In a short span of time, at least 3 elite soldiers met their demise. One was surrounded by gigantic flies that failed to be cleared by firepower. Their sharp mouth parts pierced through the exoskeleton armor, injecting venom, leading to a swift death. The other 2 were hit by the spittle of the Great Unclean One and dissolved into a puddle of goo. After paying a significant price, the combat team led by Lacroix finally managed to approach their mission objective. Next, all that was needed was to place the thermite bombs. Su! A loud bang sounded, signaling the approach of something heavy. The Great Unclean One, at the last moment, ignored the fierce assault of the interstellar warriors, partially turned its body, and swung its rusted great sword in a terrifying sweep at them. In the nick of time, Lacroix desperately dodged. He managed to escape, but the other 2 were not so lucky, nor did they have his level of skill, and were cleaved in 2. Your adventure continues at Empire. Of course, that was the only opportunity the Great Unclean One had. He immediately had to turn back to face the fierce attacks from Maddens and others. But that one strike served as a clear warning: under threat, he would not hesitate to unleash a death blow. Immediately afterward, multiple plague flies flew out towards Lacroix, determined to drive him away from the demon engine. Since Lacroix himself was already close to circling behind the Great Unclean One to reach the demon engine, and at that moment, a dozen plague fly swarms attacked, his teammates' lines of fire were blocked by Giwajia's immense body, and he could only rely on himself to resolve the situation. Despite his outstanding agility, and with his rapid-firing bomb gun, he wasn't killed but was inevitably forced to retreat in another direction. But at that moment, in the midst of the chaos, he threw the activated thermite bomb. It definitely couldn't reach the demon engine, it was too far, and easy to intercept. But in this space, there was another important target, the shield generator. When the Great Unclean One swung its heavy sword, Lacroix deliberately ran towards the shield generator, away from the demon engine. He continued to do so when pursued by the plague fly swarm. Unintentionally, he was less than 100 meters away from the shield generator. He threw the activated thermite bomb, like a grenade, a great distance away. It wasn't easy, the thermite bomb was not designed to be thrown, and it was larger than a grenade, making it awkward to throw. Maintaining precision over such a distance to land it on the shield generator was difficult as well. But Soldier King, that's exactly what he could do. Chapter 330. It was a minor surprise, after all. Lacroix not only had to throw the thermite bomb like a hand grenade over a distance of more than 100 meters, but also had to be extremely precise. Moreover, he had to complete this task under the pursuit of about a dozen plague flies. While doing this series of tasks, he really was busy. He had already relayed the tasks to the best of his ability, far from being flustered, each step was precisely calculated with impeccable execution. But he couldn't ensure absolute perfection in every issue. The thermite bomb was thrown accurately, but its activation time was slightly early, so it exploded before even touching the shield generator. However, the problem wasn't too significant. The thermite bomb that exploded about 1 meter above the approximately 2.5 meter tall shield generator still scattered a substantial amount of red, high-temperature material that splattered and flowed onto the shield generator. This triggered a further reaction: the outer shell of the shield generator dissolved, and its internal energy went out of control. After a sizzle of blue sparks, there was a loud boom, and the shield generator exploded. From the perspective of the Wind Falcon rapid attack vessels of the Allied forces outside, the sprawling cobalt blue shield that enveloped the entire offshore structure flickered a few times and then disappeared. Immediately afterward, the Wind Falcons tentatively fired a few rounds of their autocannons down below, and they indeed penetrated smoothly. Had the ground troops succeeded? They immediately relayed the relevant message to the commander below. Maddens, locked in fierce combat with the Great Demon, and Lacroix, dealing with the surrounding plague fly swarm using a bomb gun and tactical knife, both heard the message. They were invigorated. They certainly hadn't forgotten that their original mission was to destroy this shield generator. Now, they had completed the mission. As for the unexpected arrival of the Great Demon and the Abyss Rift, it seemed that there were other ways to deal with it. In any case, it seemed impossible to kill the filth-covered creature unless they destroyed the demon engine behind it, but with it, the demon engine couldn't be dealt with either. Then just forget about it. Retreat, retreat, retreat. As the highest commander, Maddens ordered decisively. A group of them fought and retreated. With Maddens covering the rear to resist the pursuit of the filth-covered creature, the elite special forces, along with 2 Phoenix veterans, retreated while firing, inflicting casualties on the demons and attacking the filth-covered creature to provide cover for Maddens. Previously, the filth-covered creature had no way to deal with them, and now in chase mode, it was even less capable. This space, which seemed vast with a ceiling height of 6 meters and large open areas, had only a few pieces of equipment and structures that had been damaged earlier in the fight. However, for a fatty that is 6 meters tall, wide, and thick, this space was still too cramped, making it inconvenient for Ge to maneuver. The greatly restricted filth-covered creature gradually fell behind in the chase. It could only emit waves of impotent, furious roars. Too frustrating. Find exclusive stories on Empire. As a great demon, when have I ever been toyed with like this? Even in my most tragic times, when I had half my head chopped off, 1 arm, and countless injuries, those were casualties from a fair and square battle. The enemies I faced then were strong and numerous, but in the end, I killed them all, and although I had to recover for some years afterward, at least that battle was satisfying. But today, it's all frustration. Not at full strength, frustrating. The enemies dodging and evading, frustrating. They targeted the shield generator and demon engine, which I could not protect at the same time, frustrating. And what's worse, I realized something wasn't right. According to the memories left by the body I occupy, there's supposed to be a starship constantly present above this world. Ge was fully aware of what it meant for a starship to be in orbit. Now, here I am without any anti-orbital equipment, just a shield generator backed by the infinite energy of the spiritualized gas field, which could have still been useful. Now, the shield generator is gone. What to do? Although the demon engine is still intact and the abyssal rift remains, the power of the chaotic abyss continues to erode the real world, transforming the vicinity into an environment more suitable for demons and continuously summoning more demons here. Before long, I could raise a demon legion from this core, and my own power will keep growing, eventually reaching my peak state. According to the memories of this body, once that step is reached, conquering the entire planet and offering another gift to my benevolent father would be within easy reach. But, what if an orbital strike hits later? Nothing has been established yet. If this demon engine behind me explodes, then it's all over. I will be sent back to the chaotic abyss because the source of the laws will be cut off, and the short time in between wouldn't be enough to build another demon engine and continue converting the energy of the spiritualized gas field. Watching those human vermin escape into the narrow passageway, rendering me completely unable to pursue, my enormous body, along with many plague demons who had just crawled out from the abyss rift and were not yet aware of what fate awaited them, stood bewildered in this space, unsure of what to do next.